Matthew Broderick, a pickpocket who thought that anything was better than prison. Little did he know, what he'd escaped from wasn't half as strange or frightening as what he'd stumbled into.
I do not believe what I believe, Lord. These are magical, unexplainable matters, and I beg you not to make me a part of them.
Hello, and welcome to Media-eval, a medieval pop culture podcast, where we talk about how medieval and medieval-inspired movies, TV, and books depict the medieval world. What did they get right? What did they get wrong? And what do they tell us about how modern people see the medieval past? I'm Sarah Ifft, a medieval historian, and today I'm joined by Ari Ryan Ailin, otherwise known as the Turnip of Terror, to talk about 1985 film Ladyhawke. So Ari, welcome.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm excited to be here.
Excited to have you. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and about why you wanted to talk about this particular film?
As the Turnip of Terror, I do a lot of medieval living history and reenactment, as well as trying to make sure that the entire community itself is operating at a higher standard of authenticity and reliability of information. When you start from ground zero, a lot of people can make a terrible number of mistakes, which we'll actually notice here in our in the visuals of the movie we're going to watch. And so that's what I do mostly online. I myself like to reenact the late 14th century, early 15th century. My impression, as we call it, you create a whole, you don't necessarily create a persona, but you create a portrayal of somebody who could plausibly have existed in the time period you want to represent. And when you call that an impression. And so my impression is generally of the lower gentry in England. My personal impression is obviously from the western side of England near Wales. But I obviously have a interest in sort of pan-European medieval history just as a recreation. So I am not an expert in anything in particular. None of my professional qualifications overlap my hobbies in even the most stretchy of tangential ways. But I like to have an authentic living history impression, and I like to help other people get there. And that's sort of what I like to do. But when it comes to why did I ask to do this movie, it's just because it's one of those movies that I remember from my childhood that kindled my love for the medieval genre. And then that obviously is part of the foundation that led to wanting to do something that was a little more historically grounded, which this movie has a lot of unintentional historical groundings, as well as a ton of some run-of-the-mill medieval tropes and myths. So it's interesting.
Yes.
And I think a lot of the historical authentic stuff that I found in it I can actually retroactively apply. So I don't think that they intended to be accurate in a certain ways that they ended up actually being, which is always funny.
There's always little things here and there every now and then. It's like, oh, well, we're going to reference the plague and we're going to reference the Crusades, as though this definitely all happened sort of at the same time. And it's like, okay.
Yeah. So this movie itself doesn't say when it's set. It's just sort of generic, sort of medieval-ish. And they don't actually figure out where they're supposed to be or anything like that. But I think I have dated the movie itself specifically. I can't say why until we go through the movie, because I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but I am fairly confident that this movie takes place on, or at least the very end of it. So the movie itself leads up to January 1st, 1386. So the bulk of the movie we're watching is set in 1385, the very end of 1385, and the final scene, the ending of the movie, is January 1st, 1386. And we'll build on why I got there, but I have a fairly detailed plan to get there.
Okay, I look forward to hearing that. Ladyhawke, which I actually had not seen before. This was my very first watch of this film, although it has been recommended to me and requested on the podcast a number of times. Came out in 1985, stars a baby Matthew Broderick as Philippe Gaston, or the Mouse. He is so small and so young. He actually is in his 20s, but easily could be playing younger. Also, Rutger Hauer as Etienne of Navarre, and Michelle Pfeiffer as Isabelle d'Anjou, Leo McKern as Imperius, John Wood as the Bishop of Aquila, and Ken Hutchison as Captain Marquet, and Alfred Molina as Cesar, who I feel like this is a sort of like odd role for Alfred Molina. He's like really not a very big character. I kind of expected Alfred Molina to be more important than he was.
Yeah, he kind of comes and goes.
Yeah.
But I really did love his appearance. Not that I had any idea who he was the first couple times I watched this movie, but I like the way he does his role quite a bit.
Yeah. I'm going to start with a just very brief orienting recap, which is going to go ahead and spoil some amount of the film, but we'll get into more details as we go into the movie. After escaping from the dungeons of the Bishop of Aquila, a young thief known as Mouse becomes embedded in a story of love, magic, and vengeance. The bishop, who was in love with Isabeau d'Anjou, had cursed her and her lover Etienne of Navarre such that she would be a hawk during the day and he a wolf at night, so that they are always together yet always separated. The mouse, along with the monk Imperius, who had once betrayed the couple, helps them to find a way to defeat the bishop and break the curse. We start with seeing the hawk itself, and the music of this movie is so 80s.
I love the music. So when you go online, you see how divisive the music of this movie is. And I thought it was wonderful because there is something about a clearly fantasy movie that by default gives you a suspension of belief. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about the things that were historically authentic and the things that were not, clearly not medieval. But we also have to say that this is a shape-changing fantasy fairy tale. So you got to give it a little bit of slack, and I'm perfectly acceptable giving as much slack to 80s synth in an 80s fantasy movie as I am to modern pop songs in vaguely medieval modern Disney movies. So I think it was amazing, and they could have called this movie Ladyhawke with the way that hawk always shows up to synth music, and I just found it delightful. I watched this a bunch as a kid. It was one of my mother's favorite movies, and I actually had the opportunity when we were working out, getting ready for this show. My mother was visiting from Hawaii because I have a new baby, and of course she wants to come see the baby. And so I had the opportunity to not only rewatch this movie for the show with my mom, who I'd watched it with like a dozen times before, but I got my wife and my oldest daughter to see it for the first time as well.
Oh, nice.
This was one of the last movies that I got rid of on VHS before I finally switched my whole collection over. So I've seen this countless times, but in rewatching it, there are a lot of things that didn't age particularly well in the special effects department, but I still say, I contend that the movie's soundtrack, the score, aged perfectly.
I kind of like the score, I think. It's definitely very noticeable, but I think there's a lot of stuff that's coming out now that maybe isn't noticeable to us in terms of what the score is like, but that will obviously be noticeable in exactly that same way in 20, 30 years to an audience that's no longer listening regularly to that kind of music. I think it works, and it's fun, and I think the sound ultimately actually kind of fits what's happening on the screen fairly well. It's just definitely kind of, especially seeing this movie for the first time, it is just very noticeable that the music is very 80s.
It does. It starts out. But then we also don't give it enough credit for, no one gives it credit for the fact that near the middle-ish end of the movie, a couple of the characters go and have a little dance off, and it's actually set to an Italian, a 14th century Italian tune. So they both have like properly medieval music and properly 80s music in it at the same time. And so I think it was just really well put together. I think it blended it well enough.
Yeah, absolutely. So we begin with Philippe Gaston, or Mouse, who is reassuring himself that nothing is impossible as he attempts to escape from the dungeons of the Bishop of Aquila. The dungeons are directly beneath the church, and they are just straight up executing people and hanging them on the exterior wall of the church. It seems like just kind of executing people for fun, as is done in films set in the Middle Ages.
Yeah, I don't know how anyone who adheres to the medieval trope of everyone was executed for everything ever actually continued with population growth. The amount of executions you find in medieval movies would be almost apocalyptic when it comes to trying to have a post-medieval culture of people surviving. But also remember that this was supposedly an unescapable fortress, like that no one had ever gotten out of Aquila before. Like the dungeons, not only was he getting out of the dungeons, but getting out of the dungeons was a statement against the iron-fisted authority of the bishop, because that was the big hammer you hung over everyone's head. You don't get out of the dungeons, and him getting out of the dungeons is a statement more than anything else. And I find this movie to be very tight when it comes to dialogue. They pile a lot of information into a couple lines here and there. And so there's a lot of things in this movie where they'll throw out a line, but it's packaged a ton of information, which allows it to pace really well. So yeah, he's not only is he getting out of the murder dungeon, which has no reason for there to be a dungeon if you're going to murder everyone anyway.
It's just that you have to like slightly space out when the murders happen. It's like, well, we're going to murder 2 people and then we're going to murder another 2 people like 3 hours later. So we just need to like keep these people in the dungeon for like a few hours while they wait to be murdered.
Yeah, I guess if you get it all over with in one go, you have nothing else to do all day. So
right. And I don't know, maybe kind of gradually you're kind of moving people from the walls and, making space. I don't know. It seems like there's maybe even too many people to like hang along that exterior wall at the moment.
Yeah, because it was a fairly populated dungeon when the guards were going through trying to find the mouse.
I think the fact that he escapes, that I think that there is this emphasis, as you were saying, on the fact that this is an impregnable fortress that nobody has ever been able to get out, does, I think, explain better than some other films do this sort of thing, why there is such a concerted effort to recover him. That it's very much about not him in terms of whatever he did, which I assume was probably petty theft in the first place, but the fact that he escaped and that cannot be allowed to stand.
Mm-hmm. And a major motivation because, as you said, they're now going to go and have to find him.
Yes.
But here at this point, he's still escaping. The first interaction we have to what I will call the passive comedy of the movie.
Yeah. So we have this whole, I would say, kind of comedic, but also I think really well done action scene of his gradual escape, which involves he is kind of going through, he's like at some point is kind of at this drain, which actually leads into the cathedral and ends up basically kind of swimming out to eventually kind of get himself kind of below the city walls, essentially, as far as I can tell.
First, he has to tunnel out.
Yeah.
There's him in as you said, a well-crafted series of him. He's going through the sewers, and there's looks like a monster in silhouette becomes just an old cow skull floating down the river. And
right.
He's got his little monologue, and this is a great way to set up what is a enduring character trait of Mouse is not only his ability to fill up space by talking, but his constant conversations with God and with his repeated bargaining for divine favors and his witty one-liners. And I think I like the one-liners in this movie because it's not a comedy, but as I said, it's passively funny. So there's enough funny things in it that happen without slowing things down and being like, stop the movie, we have a joke, you need to laugh at this beat. Instead of creating spaces specifically for comedy, they throw these really clever things in there while other people are doing things. So you kind of had this levity that overtones and keeps it lively and a little fresher. So I like it a lot. We have that, like you said, in the opening scene of the opening sequence, we have this okay, that there's going to be something lighthearted in it, but they're also just saw an intercut to 5 people being hung. So this is both a very serious movie that is taking itself seriously, but also is not so dour and dark and drab that you're going to just slog through this gothic horror.
Right, and the dungeon itself, of course, looks horrific in terms of the conditions, but you have these kind of one-liners. I do especially really enjoy that, he's praying and then does kind of manage to get a break and then kind of looks up at the sky and says, "You won't regret this, Lord. I'm a wonderful person." I particularly enjoyed that one.
But then he almost immediately commits a crime again and says, "You should already know that I was flawed," or something along those lines.
Right. The bishop is very upset to hear that the prisoner has escaped and, of course, blames Captain Marquet, the captain of the guard, who assures him that it would be a miracle if the mouse had managed to make it through the sewage system, to which another good line from the bishop who responds, "I believe in miracles, Captain Marquet. It's part of my job," which I appreciate the kind of slight gesture toward his sort of religiosity, maybe not consistently, but occasionally.
It's a great nod to what we'll find developed through most of the film in that the bishop is far more concerned with his own personal power and his own political interests than he necessarily is about the default job of a priest. This is a great first look at the fact that he's not really all about the bishoping when it comes to what he's about.
Yeah, the care of his flock is not his highest priority. The soldiers ride off in search of Gaston, who has meanwhile managed to, he steals a dagger and a purse off of one of these soldiers, runs through the woods. He's like, all right, not too far to go, another like 350 miles, and starts talking about food. He wants some cabbage, he wants some lamb. He's, a little concerned that he hears some wolves howling, but he's going to keep going. He makes it to a village and steals some clothing and some shoes. And then immediately, as he's trying to buy a drink with his stolen purse, starts bragging about how he escaped from the dungeons of Aquila. And then, of course, the group of soldiers who just have a cloak thrown over their uniforms immediately turn around and are like, well, good luck with that.
You made this easy for us.
Right.
And, because Baby Broderick is clearly young, and the mouse is obviously a young character. It's not like a young kid trying to play an older character. So his naivete, that he's cocky and he likes to talk and he knows he's good at what he's doing because he's the first one to have gotten out. So his bragging is entirely within character, but it immediately just goes terribly for him. It makes you wonder, was it his thieving skills that got him in jail, or was it his big mouth?
Right.
He does talk himself into a entertaining action sequence here at the outdoor bar where he was trying to get himself a drink because obviously now the guards want him and they've found him.
He ends up basically getting chased on top of this this kind of very nice trellis that is above the seating area. And while he's sort of there trying to avoid people stabbing him, I do appreciate that Marquet kind of gives him this like slow clap for him having managed to make it to that far, but to no further. And he is rescued by the sudden appearance of first a crossbow, but soon we see that it is the crossbow specifically in the hands of an also quite young Rutger Hauer, who has arrived and who, basically kind of shows up and then hands Gaston the crossbow and tells him to get out of here. And meanwhile, he himself takes on Captain Marquet. And at this point, we don't know that much about this character, but we do know that Marquet knows who he is. He refers to him as Captain Navarre.
Mm-hmm. Now, we also see him wearing his skin-tight, quote, armor. And I guess this is a perfect opportunity to talk about some of the costuming in this movie so far. One thing that I actually really enjoy about this movie up to this point is that, like, when he's walking through the village and he's stealing clothes and we see the guards and we see color. And that's one of those things, that's one of those tropes we find in movies where, medieval peasants they all wore brown because they were covered in dirt and they didn't have any color to their clothes. And, one of those things that we find is when we study actual history is that the actual color that even the medieval peasantry liked was almost so garish as off-putting. And it's appropriate that the 80s, a movie in the 80s, which had a garish color to its fashion, the likes of which I would not wear as an adult, it reflects an actual, maybe not as colorful as history itself would have been, but these peasants that you see in the village and you see at the outdoor tavern here, they're wearing clothes that have a variety of colors, and the guards are wearing red. But then, of course, our hero, he's wearing like all black, which, black is a color that's very difficult to achieve in medieval dyes. And so it was not used for, in great quantities.
Yeah.
Because it was just hard. It wasn't hard to make black. It was hard to keep black on clothes. And I don't know the fiber arts or dyeing particularly well to tell you whether or not it's because of the matter or the dye or whatever. There's a huge science to dyeing. It was a very big thing, and it's just black was not something that you would wear head to toe. And then, of course, this also kind of is one of the spots where you can really see the confusion as to if you're trying to put this into a timeline, because you've got the bishop's guards who are wearing like full-length surcoat style robes and armor, which is a very 11th 12th century look. And then you've got Mouse in his peasant clothes where he's wearing the equivalent of like the Boxton Man outfit, which generic quote bog standard 14th century peasant look. And then you've got this fairly close cut short bodiced uniform that Navarre is wearing, which is very 15th, like late 14th,
Right.
early, like mid 15th
Yeah.
century doublet style clothing. So you've got like 300 years of medieval fashion on scene in this one scene. When you have all three of these characters standing there, you've got, from the costume alone, you can't really date this movie whatsoever.
And it is very much this trope that in some ways there's this, well, everything in the Middle Ages kind of is at the same time.
Yeah. This condensing the lens down so that they take, well, I guess most people forget the word medieval refers to 1,000 years of history, which definitely complicates things. But now, of course, you also see that no one's wearing armor that makes any sense or is of any use, really. Padded armor was a thing, and it was actually a really useful, beneficial thing. But what Navarre is wearing is effectively the base layer to what would be a suit of armor. He's got a close-fitting doublet with a small amount of padding on it, and he's got one pauldron on the wrong side. Based on how you'd use a sword, you'd want the pauldron to be on the opposite side of the sword arm, and it's not even full pauldron size. It's kind of like this little spaldery thing. He should be wearing like metal, like his base layer should be wearing a plate harness on top. But then all the guards are wearing what's supposed to, I think the costume designers probably was thinking mail armor, like the actual riveted mail armor together.
Yeah, I think that's what it's supposed to be. It looks like it might actually be basically like a sweater painted silver, but
or like pop tops stitched together. They're all they look like these tiny little 3 millimeter by 1/4 inch plates that are sewn down to something, and that is not reflective of anything actually medieval. And so no one is wearing armor that is worth the weight that it's carrying. And this crossbow is insane. It's like this double mega crossbow where it has literally has 2 bows on it, and he like can shoot it twice. I mean, there were repeating crossbows in China. Feudal Chinese repeating crossbows never made it to Europe, and you never had 2 bows. You had one bow that had a repeating mechanism and a box clip. The Chinese repeating crossbow is really cool, but there's no medieval equivalent whatsoever. So he's got fantasy outfit and a fantasy super crossbow, and this crossbow comes up a lot, and you see it all the time, and it looks cool, but the props department did great things at making a really interesting looking ahistorical weapon there. But I do like that they were using crossbows, because all the names are French, but Aquila is an actual place in Italy, and this whole film was filmed in Italy. When you're talking about like, who used crossbows and who used bows most often in continental Europe and through the Middle Ages, you definitely have a leaning towards the Holy Roman Empire and France leaning towards the crossbow, and the English were the ones who really championed the longbow. So to see them using crossbows and having vaguely French names in a purportedly Italian setting was one of those accidentally historically authentic, or at least plausible kind of themes.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And I look forward to talking a little bit later about some of the kind of geopolitics and the things that, as you said, I'm curious as to whether anybody attempted to do any research or if they kind of accidentally got a few things right. The fight continues. Mouse starts to run off, whereas Navarre fights the others. He, of course, plot refuses to actually kill Marquet. He kills various other guards, but Marquet is left alive so he can be killed later. Mouse attempts to steal a horse, but it's somewhat of a running theme throughout that Mouse does not know very much about how to deal with horses. That is clearly not one of his skills, is clearly not working with horses.
He's a city boy.
Yeah, I mean, as a urban-based, relatively probably impoverished person, I think it actually is legitimate that he would not necessarily have a lot of horse skills.
But also Matthew Broderick himself had no idea anything about horses.
That makes sense. So he tries to steal this horse and then at some point just gives up at making the horse do what he wants to do and starts just running for it. And Navarre comes from behind him and grabs him and swings him up on the horse. We also do see the hawk, who kind of flies at a few other soldiers. We'll talk more as we go on about the hawk and eventually also the wolf and the degree to which they seem to know what's going on and have semi-human intelligence while in their animal forms.
We also see an asymmetry in that. It kind of comes over time. That we seem to find a lot more, like you said, a little bit of human intelligence in the hawk, which maybe that's why she's the title of the movie, than we do later on in in the wolf.
So they show up at this very humble-looking hut in the woods, which does have, I think, our kind of one example of the aggressively dirty peasants.
Yeah, these guys they're dressed all in black and gray and brown and dirt, and instead of clothes, they effectively have like cloth wrappings tied in various places, and yeah, they're very drab.
Right. They do allow them to sleep in the barn, although, they seem already kind of pretty suspicious. Navarre asks Mouse to take care of his horse, who is named Goliath, and I do like that he's like, let me tell you a story about a very small man named David, that he's kind of setting up, I'll kind of like, oh yeah, I feel like, maybe I'm the David to this horse is Goliath.
His very lame attempt at establishing some sort of authority over this massive Frisian, which another one of those, I don't know if they did the research or if it was accidental, but the Frisian as a breed of horse, it being big but not overly tall with a nice deep back, was a favorite of many knights as war horses. So
yeah.
There are a number of different breeds that lended themselves well. That's one thing that a lot of movies get wrong, is that they'll put a knight up on like a Clydesdale. And at some point,
just because they're big.
Yeah, but they're too big. And they also need certain like personality,
agility,
temperament traits, and they have to be able to, as we later, be able to learn specific dressage tricks. And so the fact that they used a Frisian, maybe they just used a pretty black horse that was nearby, or maybe they did some research, but it's actually a very knightly horse, which is cool. Yeah.
Mouse is a bit grumpy about the fact that he's kind of been pressed into service to Navarre and is complaining, he's more of a slave than a comrade. I was better off in the dungeons of Aquila. My cellmate was an insane murderer, but at least he respected me. So he is in the woods and hears the sound of something stalking him through the woods. And he starts by kind of having this conversation with a couple other imaginary people, a Louis and a Pierre, in order to hopefully convince, if it is a human stalking him, that he has other people with him and is therefore, I guess, less of a obvious, easy target. Then eventually just kind of is fleeing through the forest. As he arrives back, this grimy peasant comes up behind him with an axe, I guess having just decided that, I don't know, we might as well just kill these people because it's the Middle Ages and it's very violent. Then the peasant is taken down by a wolf. So this is a wolf that I will note, the wolf very clearly takes down the peasant and does not actually bother Philippe.
Now, this is actually a really interesting scene in that the peasant is the one from the little hovel that they're renting the barn out of. And
right.
So it's not particularly clear as to why, and I really like that it's ambiguous. It's not particularly clear as to why the peasant is out there with the axe. Is he out there to kill these guys in their sleep who are in their barn and take all their money? Or did he also hear the wolf and he's out there protecting his whatever meager livestock there is from the wolf? So we don't know if he's there to cut Mouse down the way it's shot. It's, Mouse sort of pops out of the woods frightened, and then suddenly there's this man there with an axe up over his head. And is he there to protect Mouse from whatever's chasing him, or is he there to kill Mouse? We don't know. And the wolf makes a snap decision, and of the two people to eat there, he eats the guy with the axe. And so, but you're right. After he's killed the man, he makes no move to.
Right.
And now maybe it's, you could say, well, when we kind of get the sense that there's more layers to this, but you can say, oh, well, maybe he's, he hasn't finished eating, so why would he go after the next guy? But this wolf that is aggressing on its own, which is already unusual if you know anything about wolves, has, killed this man and left Mouse alone. There's a moment of hum to that as Mouse flees to the barn in fear.
Right, and he finds the crossbow and is about to shoot the wolf, but then a mysterious woman stops him from doing so. Also, he warns her that, she should stay away from the wolf, but she obviously does not listen, and we do see her kind of leading the wolf calmly, or walking with the wolf. So, again, there is a sense that there is something strange going on here.
And he seems almost more concerned. Oh, it's just funny. He seems more concerned that she's out there hanging out with the wolf than the fact that a random woman appears in the barn, and he seems to have a ton of knowledge over what's going on about them. Like, how did you know that there was a wolf there, or that's what I was crossbowing at, or no, who are you? Where'd you come from? No, that's not the problem.
No, that's
the problem
fine.
is that you're going to go pet the wolf.
Right. Strange women running around and showing up in barns is just completely normal, but as long as you don't bother that wolf, it's like, that's a little weird. So we see that Marquet is rushing back to Aquila. Navarre has his hawk and is traveling with Philippe Gaston. Gaston starts talking to him about the wolf and about this woman. Navarre says, like, yeah, no, I believe you, it's fine, and asks Gaston if he knows the woman's name, and says that he wishes she would wander into his dreams, and then goes to sleep and tells Gaston that the bird will warn them if anyone is coming.
And of course, this whole conversation, Navarre's got this like knowing smile on his face because he's playing mouse to, playing innocent to mouse, but he knows what's going on, which is kind of funny because he's got a very archetypical character in this movie. He's the big, strong, kind of pig-headed, as we'll find later, like alpha male. He's very stoic. He's pretty. We later on we find that he does have a deep reservoir of emotion, but at least at this point in the film, he's kind of just this big, scary, I took on a whole group of guards on my own figure. And to see him kind of like open up a little bit and kind of like play with Mouse, like he's not just your, obviously he has something he wants from Mouse and we don't know what it is yet. But to transcend the fact that he has abducted Mouse for his own purposes and kind of meet him on a social level, I really liked that. I thought it was a great moment where it shows that we're not going to have a monotone character through this whole movie.
And I think it is interesting because at this point in the film, for me watching it for the very first time, I don't think it's entirely clear whether this is somebody who is trustworthy per se, right? That you don't really know at this point. Okay, he's clearly against the bishop and against the bishop's men, and so there's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But does that mean that he actually is a decent person in some way, or is he just using Mouse for his own ends? And because Mouse is the character through which we've been kind of introduced to the film, we're obviously supposed to be on his side.
Yeah.
This is, I think, maybe the kind of first moment where you sort of get a sense of maybe, all right, maybe this is somebody who we are definitely supposed to like or to be moving toward liking, at least. So I think they do that interestingly.
It does help start to give the indication, which we don't get until pretty much the middle of the movie, is that Mouse is our narrator and our interpreter, but he's not our protagonist. And so he is our lens with which we experience this story, but he is not effectively, well, he's the main character, he's not the protagonist. And this is where we go, okay, this big, scary, clearly dangerous, black-clad warrior is, like you said, not necessarily the danger to Mouse, but he's going to be Mouse's ally, and he may very well be one of the motivating characters in this movie. This does sort of show that he's not to be feared as much by Mouse, and by virtue of Mouse, the audience. Effectively, anytime Mouse is uncertain about something, the audience is likewise has a hard time knowing exactly what's going on, which is a great storytelling feature. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and that is because, he really is this kind of relatable audience surrogate kind of character. Even as we get more information about Etienne and eventually also Isabeau, they become more likable. I don't think either of them are ever particularly relatable.
Yeah.
And there is still, I think, something of a distance that we continue to have from both of them. So really the character through which we are kind of seeing these people and through which we are experiencing these events is Mouse, who, like the audience, is to some extent on the sidelines of what the major story actually is.
Yes. This is while they're walking through the woods, and I love the scenery in this movie. There's some great establishing shots of gorgeous Italian countryside.
Yeah.
There's a lot of traveling in this movie, but they always seem to indicate the travel with some great panoramic view. Even if you don't know exactly how long they've been on the road, it's clear that they have moved from one location to the next and the stories progress.
Back in Aquila, Marquet returns, and the bishop is, first of all, not thrilled to hear that Marquet does not have Gaston, but it turns out he has even worse news, that Navarre has returned. Aquila also asks about the hawk and instructs Marquet that the hawk is not to be harmed and that if she is, Marquet will be executed. And there are all of these little moments here and there where there are these other people where I'm like, how much do you know about this situation? Because that is a weird order.
Well, you also see, like you said, in the background, there's these like little altar boys, and you'll get this cutaway of them like looking at each other like, the hell are they talking about?
Right.
Because it makes no objective sense. And is this the one in the courtyard with the dancing? I'm getting the scenes mixed up. Do we see him again where they're in the courtyard with the dancing? There's like a performer there.
Oh, that's a good question. I can't remember exactly when that scene was. I think
believe
they're just
it's
walking through the cloister.
Because isn't this the one where he comes and it's funny how detached the bishop is from the real world, because the first thing he's mad about at Marquet is, how dare you come to me unwashed and unshaved and your hair's not brushed. And he's just so offended that this man came to him so raggedy and disheveled. And it's only when he says something about Navarre being back that the bishop's even willing to talk to him in the first place.
I do appreciate that, though, as an acknowledgement that actually people did bathe, and that normally you would bathe and look nice before you went before somebody who is a big deal like the bishop.
Right, yeah. If nothing else, high society had an expectation of cleanliness, which is something that TV doesn't necessarily always get right about the Middle Ages. But it's also, I think he's having, at this point in the movie, he has this performer, and she's in this long flowy dress, and she's got her arms out, and she's like doing this spinny dance. I don't know if it's intentional or not, but it kind of looks like she's got like feathers on her dress. And is she literally watching a performance of like an interpretive dance of a hawk? If that is intentional, then that is a huge subtext to the bishop's obsession with the hawk, which is then supported by his completely batty and nonsensical, hey, I know you're after the captain of the guard, but I really care about this random bird.
Right. Don't hurt the bird. I will kill you if you hurt this bird.
Which is, like I said, objectively completely nonsense. Like, it's weird and makes no sense outside of the context of the fairy tale that is erupting around this movie.
The bishop has a lot of things to worry about. He also is complaining about the fact that there is this famine that's like left these people unable to pay their taxes, and so I am the real victim of this.
This is another one of those data points that supports my idea that this is in the 1380s, in that French names, Italian setting, so sort of generic Southern Europe, kind of, it's either on the Iberian Peninsula or it's in Italy. I'm fairly confident that this movie is set in Italy, despite all the confusing and unnecessarily French names to the characters.
Oh, I think that actually makes sense. I'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later.
Oh, perfect. But there was a famine, an actual documented famine in the 1370s, 1374, 1375. It hit specifically France, Italy, and Spain. So it was a Southern European famine, and that would have been within 5-10 years. And there's, an agrarian society without industrial mechanized farming can only recover from a famine so quickly. So you're going to have an extended period of poverty, especially if, say, this local area was either A, hit hard, or you had a greedy, evil bishop who made no changes to his taxation policies during the actual famine.
And certainly, I did not look up that specific thing, but it certainly is, there are a lot of famines over the course of the early to getting into late 14th century. There are a number of famines, and of course it is also the case that the question of how damaging the famine is tends to depend on a combination of how wide an area it's hitting, but also on what local policies are. If the king or lord or whoever is locally in charge is making a major effort to bring in grain from elsewhere, then that famine is going to be less damaging than if they're not doing that. And he seems like he's maybe not the type who would do that.
No, not considering how much gold he wears. And I feel like they have very highly fantasized the clerical garments that he's wearing, which is funny because, what little I do know of ecclesiastical garments is that they were probably some of the more ornately embroidered and garish and opulent things that you could find outside of royal garments themselves.
Yeah, because they have just scenes on them. There are some that are actually you can follow a narrative on the outfit.
Right, almost like stained glass, but on somebody's chasuble. So in spirit, him being dressed super fancy is plausible. I just don't think that they did it in an authentic fashion.
He also tells Marquet that he has had a vision from the Lord, that Satan's messenger is among them, and that it is Etienne of Navarre, so he's certainly trying to use this religious rhetoric to his advantage, and also asks for someone named César to be brought to him, who we will shortly see who that is. We return to Gaston and Navarre. Gaston is attempting to use Navarre's sword, to split firewood or something, right?
Right. So let's talk about this gigantic sword, because
it is so large.
It is such a big, stupid sword. Now, big, stupid swords existed in the 16th and 17th century. Now, large swords themselves, there's a progression of the length of swords, both swords and armor, cat and mouse. You get better armor, you need a better sword, and so the sword forms change, the blade widths and their balance points and how flexible or how stabby or cutty they were evolved over time. But they were always in the 13th, 14th centuries what you would call two-handed swords. But that great, as tall as you you could see that there's a couple extra spikes down the blade that are reminiscent of the Flamberg style, where you would have to reach forward of the crossguard to manipulate the sword and treat it more like a polearm. That style sword that they've replicated there is a 16th century version. Right. And there's just a metallurgical science required to make a sword that holds up under its weight that large. And another thing is that when you do have swords that big, there's an entire science or an art to fighting with a sword that big. You treat it very much like you would a polearm, which means you do not carry it in one hand and swing it around effortlessly because it's a 10-ounce prop, like the way he does. He literally rides on horseback with this thing in one hand and just sort of which
swings about with it, right?
If it's supposedly an heirloom, which we'll also get to later, their respect for a antique is deplorable.
Right. And so we get a little bit of information about this as a family heirloom, that it has these various gems on it. One is a kind of representation of his family and family name more broadly. One is representative of their alliance with the Holy Church in Rome. One is from his father in the Crusades, which, if we are taking a 1385 date, this is one of my many pet peeves, is that there are not crusades to the Holy Land after 1291.
There's things like the Savoyard Crusade, but that was, in the Ottoman Empire. It wasn't to the Holy Land. So maybe his dad went on that one in the 1360s, but I'm not sure the movie meant one of the less popular non-Jerusalem based crusades. I think they just definitely got the timeline wrong on this one.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Baltic Crusades. Sometimes the term crusade is the kind of label crusade is applied to some of the fights against Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula. But when at least people now hear the Crusades, the assumption tends to be these crusades to the Holy Land and not these variety of other things that also get called crusades or designated formally as crusades. So this seems to me like one of those things that just people kind of say that and don't recognize that crusading to the Holy Land is not a phenomenon that was still happening in the kind of mid to late 14th century. I mean, because I've seen a ton of movies that are very explicit about the fact that people come back from a crusade to the Holy Land and then all of a sudden it's the Black Death.
Yeah, that's a little tough since people don't live for hundreds of years.
Right, yeah, it's it took you 50 years to get back, huh? Whoops.
Yeah. And of course, they also, they do say later on, they talk about the plague. And of course, as you said, when people think of the plague, even though we know that the plague cropped up constantly after it started throughout the end of the medieval timeline. When people say the plague, they're talking about the Great Mortality from the 1350s. Having the original Black Death from the 1350s doesn't actually mess the timeline up too terribly. But we'll talk about that when we get to talk to César again.
Then there's also this one gem, which is the gem which will be filled after Navarre has fulfilled his own personal quest, which is to kill the bishop. And so this is where he reveals to the mouse what he wants from him, which is that you got out of these dungeons in Aquila, you can be the one to guide me back in. I like that Philippe Gaston is he's yeah, you think this is your mission from God? I talk to God all the time, and he never mentioned you.
He never mentioned you. I love it. But so this also is like, I think he says in this monologue that the sword is like 5 generations old, which again, instead of, you have a sword that's 150 years too late for the time period that is supposedly owned by someone who crafted it 100 years before you're owning it. It's just, there's no way that you would see this sword. It also makes me wonder, it is a young Hauer, but he's clearly a middle-aged man at the time. Like, he's, an established, mature male. Yeah. What were his goals for the gem before this? Like, did he change it?
That is a good question.
Or did he just wait for it to present itself? I feel like by this time he should have had a firmly established gem plan.
But of course it is also linked into this kind of general idea, which I've seen in a couple other things about medieval knights. A medieval knight, like, they have to have this, like, specific quest that is, like, their one thing that they need to accomplish in their life. And I'm like, how?
No.
How do you think that's supposed to work? I mean, these are people who have jobs.
I just want to know what he wanted to put in the gem before before this whole movie kicked off.
Right, because he is, by the way, he would have been, when the movie was filmed, he was 41 years old in terms of, the age of the actual actors.
And that's probably comports fairly well to the age of the character, which it's probably a good thing Kurt Russell didn't take the role, because Kurt Russell was so much younger. So supposedly, from what I read on the internet, Kurt Russell was supposed to be, was the frontliner for Navarre. Like, up into, like, days before production, Kurt Russell was Navarre, and they had approached Hauer with Marquet's position. He did not want to be Marquet, but he said, if you ever need me to play Navarre, that's the role I'd like. And so days before production, Kurt Russell backed out for some reason. And so they were like, you said you wanted to play this character, right? And so he literally drove his motorhome from the Netherlands down to Italy and filmed this movie like on a minute's notice. So.
Oh, wow. It seems that despite convincing him by throwing a sword at his head, Navarre does not, entirely trust Philippe.
We need to put a pin in this scene, as well as a couple others, because I love how this movie adheres so closely to that old theater concept, and I can't remember the name of the guy who said it, like, if in the first act there's a gun on the wall, by the third act it should have been fired. Like, this scene and a couple others just show how closely this movie adheres to some very basic, make sure everything means something. Because so he throws the sword at the mouse and obviously misses him intentionally and gets it lodged in a tree, which is another point in favor of, if you treat this sword this poorly, it would never have lasted 500 years. But also, swords aren't spears, and it flies a hilariously straight line, like laser, as laser straight.
I mean, it's like a crossbow.
Oh, it's like a shot from a gun. Yeah, it's amazing.
He, I guess, despite having convinced him by throwing a sword that easily could have hit him, he is still not entirely convinced that Philippe is not going to take off in the middle of the night when, as we will know, he is a wolf. So he ties him up, and at that point, we see the woman again, who is, like, running after a rabbit, and Gaston tells her, I was tied up by the bishop's guards. Like, the only reason they haven't killed me is because they're taking me to Aquila so the bishop could do that. And she's like, oh, okay. And she unties him, and then he runs off. And then as soon as he runs off, she realizes, like, oh, shit.
Yeah, so we as the audience at this time don't know why Philippe is tied up. And we know Philippe is a talker, and we know nothing he says is nearly ever the truth. And so he's doing this long spiel that is obviously fishy. Like,
yeah.
And so the question here, at least the question I always had when I first watched it, was, is he trying to endear himself to this woman? Because he's a young man and she's a attractive woman, and there's obviously, like, he kind of, like, is he trying to get her to talk to him? But this is also one of those indications where we find that whoever this woman is clearly not a damsel in distress type character.
Right.
She wears men's clothes, which it does two things symbolically. One, obviously, it indicates before, when they were in the barn, Navarre pulls this, like, purple garment, this, like, it looks like it's made of chiffon or something.
Right.
But he pulls this thing out. I don't know if it's supposed to be a veil or something, and he sort of fondles it and looks off into the sunset with a bit of, consternation. But he has in his bags what looks like feminine items, but she is wearing like a tunic shirt belted down in some, tights, and she's effectively running a rabbit down by hand, which is no mean feat. And the only reason she doesn't get the rabbit is because Philippe pipes up and startles it. This character is not a set piece. This is obviously a character with some level of expertise and independence and ability to care for herself. But who is she? Why is she? These are things we don't know yet.
Right. He does, in fact, get caught by the Aquila guards. I guess this is why you don't, say like, I got caught by the Aquila guards. Then, of course, that's exactly what happens to him.
Karma.
He tells them that Navarre's ridden south, and then they're like, we're going to ride north. So they're kind of, he's like, trying to, he's like, God damn it, like, why, I'm supposed to, like, be able to, like, lie and that, or, like, it's like, I tell the truth, and that's supposed to, like, not help things. So Navarre has to rescue him once again, and during the fight, the hawk gets shot.
They actually both get shot, and they both get shot
yes.
in the same shoulder, which is interesting. I find that to be a nice little parallel there.
Yeah.
Navarre, who proves that he should have been wearing a breastplate because he takes a crossbow bolt right through that padded gambeson into the shoulder. So he gets hit, but he doesn't seem to care so much because he's big, bad, cool night guy, right? But the bird, obviously, from a quarrel from a crossbow is much worse the wear.
Oh, yeah. It is honestly astonishing that this bird is not dead. He sends Philippe to ride to a ruined castle with a monk named Imperius to get help. We've got some more 80s music while Philippe gallops off, and the hawk is obviously freaking out because it's in pain.
So this is where baby Broderick shows off how little he knows how to ride a horse. From what I read is that Hauer caught wind that Broderick didn't really know how to ride a horse and had some trepidation against actually galloping off, but they needed the horse to actually gallop off for the shot. So in the scene, when you watch on scene, Navarre slaps the flanks of Goliath and the horse gallops off. Well, Hauer actually just slapped this horse so hard that it galloped away that they had to get in vehicles and chase after Broderick because he didn't know how to stop the horse. He just held on for his life.
Oh, that's amazing. Poor guy. That's great, because, it totally works with the character, too. Yeah, so he arrives at the castle. Imperius is kind of yelling down to him as he's like, I've got this bird, it's injured. Imperius's immediate response is, great, dinner. And Philippe's like, no, we can't eat this bird. And Imperius's response is, oh God, is it Lent already? Which I really enjoyed.
Well, yeah, it shows exactly how cloistered and hermitish this guy is. He's, hauled himself up in what is clearly an abandoned castle and is completely ignorant of what day it is.
I do appreciate, however, that it is accurate in the sense that you cannot eat bird on Lent. So that's nice.
Yep.
And that he does know that. He doesn't know if it's Lent or not, but he knows that you're not supposed to consume bird on Lent.
So at least he's a good monk.
Yeah, he's trying. He doesn't know when it is, but he's doing his best. They walk into the castle, and Imperius, basically like sends Mouse away, says, he's gonna, work on this hawk. But Mouse does manage to sneak around while Imperius is off gathering herbs and slips back inside. And look at that. Now, instead of a wounded hawk, there is a wounded lady.
Yeah. And surprisingly enough, coincidence, this wounded lady is the same person that we've seems to be meeting every single night over the course of this journey through the hillside. Even Mouse, who is willing to be in self-denial about what's happening, at some point has to just give in and accept that, there's too many parallels here for anyone to even be willfully denial about what's happening.
Right. Back in Aquila, Cesar arrives. He is creepy.
Oh yeah, I love him.
Yeah, so we will get more from him in a moment. But yes, he is filthy. I, at first, did not even recognize him as Alfred Molina.
Yeah, not until you get that, like, grinning super close-up of his face. Because he's got this huge bushy hair and the beard, and he's got these, like, furs on him.
So Mouse has figured out, all right, I keep saying this wolf. The wolf is Navarre. There's this woman. I keep saying this woman. The woman is the hawk. And Imperius at this point tells him what's going on, that the woman is Isabeau d'Anjou, whose father, the Count of Anjou, died slaughtering Saracens at Antioch. Did he?
No,
Did he?
Okay.
Her father was a very old man, apparently.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why he obviously was felled in battle, because that's what happens when you go in there as a geriatric, I guess.
Right. Well, but also, died slaughtering Saracens at Antioch. As I said, that at the latest would have been 1291. So if this takes place in 1386, it's like, oh, your father died a century ago? Are we doing some really interesting artificial insemination here? Because you don't seem to be 100 years old.
Well, maybe she's just ages well, and we were not aware. There's some background we're missing.
Maybe she's like living in hawk years? I don't know, but...
Yeah. No, I think this one we can chalk up to another one of those didn't actually do the research. Everything in medieval happened at the same time mistakes.
Yes. They have this kind of weird conversation about how basically, like, yeah, everybody is just, like, in love with this woman the second they see her, including, like, Mouse and also sort of Imperius and also, of course, most importantly, the bishop. She was not into the bishop and sensed his wickedness. My editorializing is that maybe she also sensed the fact that he's a bishop. And while, of course, bishops did have affairs and concubines, etc., given her status in particular, being like a bishop's concubine, given that he could never legally marry her, is like maybe not the best move anyway.
Yeah, that's a step down for high nobility.
Right. But it is also this in general, like, there's a lot in terms of just, like, various pieces of media seem to, like, forget clerical celibacy, because it never actually gets brought up as a problem.
True, but there was also, and I don't remember the timeline on it, but if I recall correctly, it wasn't baked into the beginning. Didn't celibacy get established sometime in the medieval era?
Oh, yeah, but if this is 1386, it's long, long established. I mean, it's 11th century. It's 11th century. It's the Gregorian reform movement that is pushing clerical celibacy. So it's very established by this point.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because I just did not know when that happened. Not brought up as a problem, and sometimes I think we kind of get, and I'm not one to necessarily defend medieval Christianity because it has its own plenty of problems, but I do think that sometimes it can be used as the punching bag necessarily of like the medieval era was terrible, and there's a long list of those Victorian introduced, the medieval world is terrible, everyone was dirty, everyone was filthy, everyone was stupid, everyone was illiterate. The one on the list is that every priest was a lascivious, corrupt individual. They either lusted for power or they lusted for women, and no one was really into the religiosity that they were supposed to be. And that's one of those tropes and an easy punching bag. And so I think that's sort of what we're falling foul of here, is that priestly infidelity and lack of celibacy isn't even addressed because it's kind of underwritten. Sort of, it's taken for granted that obviously medieval priests were bad at priesting.
Right, and I will say it is a trope that does have its origins in some way in medieval literature, right? That this was something that obviously is known to not be the ideal, it's known to not be formally acceptable, but people are aware, of course, of the fact that in practice, yes, there are priests who are not so great at the whole celibacy thing, and it is a common way that priests are mocked in medieval literature.
Yeah, what was that joke? The four legs joke?
I don't think I know that one.
There's a book of medieval jokes, and I'm pretty sure one of them, the punchline is, the simpleton is sleeping at the foot of the bed of the bishop and asks in public, why the bishop has four legs at night or something like that from underneath the covers.
Yeah, and so it is something that, of course, they're talking about in a medieval context, but the way in which it gets talked about in an actual medieval text is a way that acknowledges that this isn't what things are supposed to be like, whereas it's just kind of taken as universal and the norm in some ways in some of these films.
Well, later on, when we get to the major exposition dump where Imperius sort of catches up Mouse on what's really going on here with the curse and such, we do have an indication that the actual muckety-mucks of the church are not okay with what the bishop has done.
Yes, it does say that he has been rejected by Rome herself, and I have a lot, I'll get into it a little bit later, but I have a lot of thoughts about, like, the overall politics of this film.
Yeah, there's implications, definitely.
Yes. Anyway, so Imperius continues. He says that Isabeau rejected him, and that she was already in love with Etienne of Navarre, who was at that time the captain of the guard, and their drunk-ass confessor fucked up and revealed to the bishop that the two of them were in love with one another. The bishop lost it. Navarre and Isabeau fled, but the bishop followed and struck a bargain with Satan and cursed them, such that, as of course we've already gathered at this point, Isabeau is a bird by day and Navarre a wolf by night, so that they are always together yet eternally apart.
And it was in this conversation that he said the thing about being rejected by Rome herself. I got the impression that while the bishop was hunting down and chasing after Navarre and Isabeau the first time when they first fled, that he somehow asked for aid from the Pope to get maybe more reinforcements, head them off. Rome itself was like, look, we're not going to help you chase down a skirt, like you're on your own in that. Though now that you mention the idea that maybe he has been disenfranchised by Rome in general, and it just has not caught up to him on the ground is an interesting one as well. I had never considered.
That's how it came off to me in terms of talking at him. Because the rhetoric is he's an evil man rejected by Rome herself. That came off to me as not saying that he was, turned down and not assisted by the Pope in this particular circumstances. The language very much struck me as the Pope has just, completely, the Pope has essentially attempted to, defrock him, basically, and was apparently not successful, which, again, I'm going to talk later more about how I think the politics of this film ultimately don't make sense, but...
Right. Yeah, I think the 3 years that these two were on the run is probably enough time for that to have caught up to him, but...
So we go back to Cesar, who says that, basically, look, he sent me to kill this one wolf. I killed a bunch of wolves. There's been a lot of wolves since the plague. I can't kill all of the wolves. I don't know what you want from me, which I kind of get.
And this is where we get another layer of, okay, so the plague happened in recent memory, but none of these people seemed particularly concerned about plague on an interpersonal level. So we can assume that the Great Mortality was in the past enough that they're not actively concerned about getting plague, just that there's not as many people around, which was a legitimate result of the great dying of everybody. So, you've got these... This is another marker that I put on my list of reasons why, when we get to 1385, it's perfectly plausible. And I like how in this scene, Cesar is like, look, you want me to really kill every single wolf in Italy? I mean, that's a big, tall
right.
order. And in this scene, the bishop's priest words, I don't know if there's a special name for their long holy staff, but he's literally pawing through the pelts.
Crozier.
Right, but his crozier's got a spear point on the bottom that is then hidden by a cap. So they have to put a cap over it so it doesn't look like it's a spear. And so this is another thing where they're laying down a lot of foundation. These things happen and then they have a payoff. And I love how almost everything in this movie has a payoff.
Yeah.
This is that scene where we get the crozier with the crozier spear, which was an interesting little tidbit and something I know I did not notice the first time I watched it.
I actually don't think I noticed that in this scene. Interesting. That's a whole additional thing, but we'll move on. Yeah, you're not. Bishops are not supposed to carry spears, by the way. I'll just say, that's not what they're supposed to do. But this guy's clearly not a very good bishop. Yeah. So the bishop does tell Cesar basically, look, there's going to be this woman. She only travels at night, and look for the wolf then. Cesar is very confused. And I will say, Cesar is clearly this just kind of medieval-ish villain type. And clearly we're not supposed to like him, etc. But I do kind of appreciate the fact that, he's just this is his job. He hunts wolves. And now he's getting into this whole weird situation with this woman and a wolf who's in love with her, and he's just he has this look on his face which is just I feel like this is way above my pay grade.
Yeah, so I need to find a woman who I fall instantly in love with when I see her, but she loves the wolf, and that's the one you want me to kill. He's got this I'm never going to understand, so I'm not even going to try. Look,
right. So Isabeau wakes up, Philippe introduces himself, they talk about one another, and he has this kind of whole very lengthy and embellished version of how Navarre talked about her when she was a hawk.
He's such a liar. I love how much he tells stories about everything for no reason. He doesn't even need to lie. He just does because that's who he is.
I actually kind of liked these lies this begins his process of he has a number of, essentially he kind of creates this role for himself as this go-between for these two people who can't actually have a human conversation with one another. So he now then takes on this role of delivering messages, which tend to have some kernel of truth, but also a lot that is very dramatically embellished. And I kind of like it because while on the one hand, it often seems sort of pointless, on the other hand, it's like, oh, but you're kind of making them both feel better.
Well, yeah, he's stuck in this fairy tale, so you may as well just lean into it and create the romantic story that you'd read in a book. Like, well, if you're gonna be stuck in this weird, crazy story, then let's make a good story out of it.
Right.
Yeah, I do like that a lot. And there's a point at which he clearly realizes that these people are not only in true, like, Princess Bride level true love, they're also suffering horribly for it. And there's a little bit of kindness in there where he clearly is growing more and more endeared to these people, and it's one way to make them feel better, as you said, and that's a kindness that he demonstrates, because that's what he has to offer is his words. Like, he can steal things, and he can run his mouth. He's not really good at much else, so he may as well lean into his talents.
Yeah. So he speaks to Imperius and asks Imperius if they know that he's the one who betrayed them. And Imperius tells Philippe that he has found a way to break the curse, and that Navarre can't just kill the bishop. But then the bishop's men arrive. We have, I think, another good action scene in this ruined castle where Imperius is essentially kind of taking advantage of the various design flaws or, ruin flaws to basically kind of kill the bishop's men. So, there is a bit where he tells Philippe, make sure to walk on the left. And he obviously, does not give that instruction to the bishop's men, who then fall and die because they walked to the wrong side of the bridge.
And this is also something I see, which is interesting, because this movie shows off that there is a style of making movies that is different from today, in that not everyone can fight. Like today, you look at like an Avengers movie, and no matter who you are, you're obviously a kung fu master. Everyone can hold their own in a fight. In this, Imperius makes no attempt at fighting the bishop's men. That's not what he does. He just beguiles them with living in a terrible old house and lets them bumble through it.
Which I also really appreciate, because of course there's zero reason in medieval reality that a monk priest would have significant military training.
And especially at this point in time, for a monk of his caliber to have then been in a martial combat with trained guards of any sort would have been ridiculous. And it's something that I think you might see more frequently in modern films. People who do not need to know how to fight are able to advantage themselves based on their talents, which I think is really refreshing.
Right. And I believe the evidence that we do have of monks, having some kind of military skills are also much earlier in the Middle Ages, right? I mean, they're not 14th century.
Not at all.
And at this point, I would say, to the extent that you would have a monk who would have military training, it would be, say, if you are maybe like a child of a gentry family and you started out not necessarily knowing you were going to end up being a monk, and you got some kind of training when you were relatively young before you took your vows.
By this point, you're right. There would be very little chance that an old, dodgy, drunken priest would have any idea how to hold his own in a fight. I agree.
Right. Philippe goes and attempts to rescue Isabeau. He ends up kind of getting her basically to the top of this tower. She falls, but fortunately it turns into day at exactly the right moment, and she transforms as she's falling into a hawk.
The sun crests over the mountains. Now we have to acknowledge that at this point they have actually administered first aid. They've removed her arrow by now. By the time the bishop's men are here, they have effectively healed her, so to speak. And it is amazing how well she seems to have recovered, because by the next morning, they pull the arrow out and put a poultice on there. And I'm happy that they actually have Imperius go out into the hillside, and he's plucking herbs and making a poultice. But she's better.
Yeah, she's just completely better. Yeah.
There's the scene before she falls off the roof where she's literally, and I'd have to double check to see which arm it is, but I think she's literally holding on to Mouse's arm and dangling from the top of a tower by the wounded arm. And she's like, oh, I'm slipping. Not oh, I have no strength in my arm because I've been stabbed.
Yeah. And I feel like that's an action film trope in general, right? That people just get healed from major injuries way too quickly.
Absolutely. Well, we see the same thing when Navarre shows up later. Because in this very same scene where she falls and turns into the bird, Navarre suddenly pops up on a hillside and saves Philippe yet again with his crossbow. And he's perfectly fine, too. His crossbow bolt to the shoulder didn't bother him any.
And he didn't even get a poultice, as far as we can tell, so...
No, he just, I don't know, in wolf form, he rolled in the dirt, I guess.
Yeah. Navarre thanks Imperia after having rescued Philippe for having healed Isabeau, and Imperia says that he is the one who is grateful because he's learned how to break the curse. And so this is when he the first time gives as much of an explanation as he gives of the details of all of this, which is that in 3 days, the bishop is going to hear the confessions of the clergy, and at this point they must both confront him in the flesh, and that they will then be freed, and that this is something that they can do, quote, because there will be a day without a night and a night without a day.
Which, what does that mean?
Right. They can't explain this despite the fact that this is a scientific phenomenon that people are aware of.
And Navarre quite realistically says, I have no idea what the heck that means. Like, you are speaking gibberish. Yeah, because it's a
meaningless statement.
Yeah, I have a mission to uphold, and you have given me nothing with which I need to change my quest. This also is like, why does Imperius know specifically that this is happening in 3 days if he was so out of sorts that he didn't even know what month it was? Anyway.
So I feel like the implication in the film is that he got, like, a vision or something.
Is it? Because there's no spot in which he, like, was researching through papers or looking at almanacs or...
So that was my sense, is that would... And also, why would he know that that would break the curse, right? I mean, especially... I mean, we'll get to it, but, like, why would just the two of them... I mean, it might... Like, I could see why he might say, hey, you could chat with Isabeau at this moment, but why would that break the curse?
But he also seems to be fairly intimately aware with the details of the curse.
Yeah.
They don't say he was there when the bishop makes the curse happen, but he seems to be very intimately aware of that it was a pact with the devil, and that it was... And he knows all these details about the curse, but they don't really tell us why he knows these things. And maybe that's just because Imperius is... he's a shamed monk.
He's kind of losing it.
Yeah, well, he's a drunkard. He clearly wasn't very good at keeping secrets, and he ruined people's lives, and it kind of destroyed him mentally. So maybe it's just all part and parcel of him being a broken man, but, you know, he tried to help, which is nice.
Yeah.
We just don't know how he came by this information.
Right.
If he had this information before Isabeau was brought to him, why did he make no attempt at finding Navarre to help him?
Also weird. But yeah, I just kind of chalked up the knowledge in the first place to him having gotten some kind of weird vision.
I can live
because
with
he
that.
does actually say, like, God told me this, or something along those lines. Or that, like, this shows that God has forgiven me, or something like that. That was my guess, is that he thinks he's gotten, like, a message from God about this.
That would make a lot of sense, because them coming back to him and him being able to save Isabeau's life, which puts them back on the path to being able to break the curse, and Navarre shows up and have a conversation with him instead of gutting him. Like, I saw those circumstances as, I have been redeemed, these people have come back to me, I can be part of the solution, but it would very much, as, you know, the divine intervention, some sort of vision, would definitely fit inside that baggage.
Right, but we don't quite get that stated explicitly, I don't think. At this point, they go off, and Philippe is, you know, doing his go-between thing with Navarre and Isabeau. He also calls Isabeau Ladyhawke, which is the name of this film, and also which Navarre thinks is adorable. I thought the look on his face was excellent when he first hears this.
Of course, if this was a CinemaSins review, this is where we would click roll credits and the ding. They do say the title of the movie here, which is fantastic, and everyone seems to love it. Like, there isn't, like, no eye rolling, no, like, oh, you silly mouse. It was just like, this is wonderful. And why did I not think about this in the intervening 3 years?
Philippe is trying to convince Navarre into listening to Imperius. Navarre has no interest in doing this. As he continues in his mission of go-between that evening, he basically is, like, running off. He's trying to steal some clothing for Isabeau, while also muttering, I used to eat hawk for dinner all the time, and now look where I am.
But of course, he's talking to her when she's in hawk form, and we still don't necessarily know how much they actually remember and how sentient they are, because we get the impression that Isabeau they appear to know who their friends from mortal life are. They can clearly distinguish Mouse. They can clearly distinguish Navarre and or Isabeau on alternating night and day. And so we see the hawk attack Bishop's men. We see the wolf attack the axe-wielding peasant. But we don't ever get an indication that they actually have recollection of conversation. And in fact, in some of the conversation, I can't remember where it is, I think they talk about having a half-life, like only living half of their life. So the impression I get is that they don't, it's like they go to sleep.
Yeah.
So he's talking to this hawk, he's sitting there holding the hawk and it's like nipping at him. And that's when he's teasing it with, I used to eat a hawk every day. And something to point out also, they used a red-tailed hawk, which I believe is a North American bird.
Yes.
But I wonder if it's just that red-tailed hawks are more common in Hollywood prop houses.
Yeah, and also, they had to have hawks that were presumably, I would guess, already relatively well-trained prior to starting filming. Yeah. And so I can kind of get the decision to just go with whatever, well-trained hawks were available, because they need the hawk to do a lot of things.
I do love how much hawk there is. It's appropriate level of hawk for a Ladyhawke movie, but I do like that they did not shy away from using this bird as much as possible, like an actual live trained bird on set. I think they probably used a couple birds.
Yes, I believe they did. I think I actually saw the bird casting. And yes, there are 2 female red-tailed hawks, and apparently one of them is actually named Ladyhawke.
Oh, good.
According to Wikipedia, and also they, I guess hawks live a while. They died relatively. Oh, she was actually renamed Ladyhawke at some point after the film. But yes, she died in 2007, and the other hawk died in 2014.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, hawks apparently live a long time.
There you go.
Yeah.
So he goes and he steals a bunch of clothes, and there seems to be a party going on, but they don't go to the party. They hide in a barn near where the tavern is, and there's clearly frivolity happening inside, and maybe even a minstrel troupe, because it's clearly there's this big wagon that he pilfers for clothes.
Yeah.
He does think of something that Navarre never did, which is get her a dress to wear at night.
Right. Though, of course, I actually think it is worth noting, and we talked about this a little bit before, that for the purposes of practicality, there are very good reasons she would have perhaps preferred to not necessarily wear a dress when she is ordinarily completely alone, because Navarre is a wolf, that she wants to, I think, hopefully, probably not attract a lot of attention. She wants to move quickly. There's actually no real good reason she should wear a dress.
True. There's a lot of support for her trying to pass off as a boy at night.
Yeah.
At the end of the film, Navarre references her hair, that she had cut it, which may be another indication that she was moonlighting as a boy the whole time.
Yeah. I do definitely kind of see why she would want to maybe hopefully just kind of short hair, boys' clothing, fly under the radar, hope everybody kind of thinks she's a young man, and that means there's a host of things she doesn't have to worry about.
Correct.
So she and Philippe are sort of chatting and bonding, and they seem to be having a nice evening. They dance, and then she kind of pops outside and sees a wolf pelt and freaks out, and then sees César.
Actually, Mouse convinces her, for what seems to be the first time ever, to actually go hang out with other people. He not only gets her to dance, but he loosens her up enough to agree to go to where the minstrels are playing and hang out at the bar and be let's just be normal people tonight. And that's why they step outside. And then of course they are confronted with a very not party face of the grungy César and his giant pile of freshly skinned wolf pelts.
Right. Philippe, of course, accidentally gives up the important information by referring to her by name, of course, because she's the only person who possibly has that name, but whatever. But so he gives that away, and so he rides off, and it's clear to the audience that it's clearly not because he is super scared of Philippe, but because if you look at the two of them, why would he be?
And Philippe even holds up this great sword of Navarre's as if that it almost makes him less intimidating, because he's how much he's struggling to hold the thing up.
Right, it's very clear, you can't do anything with that, buddy.
Because when César turns his back on him, he just goes conk and just drops the tip of the sword that he was only barely holding up in the first place.
Isabeau rides out kind of after him, basically, and César starts laying these wolf traps. He closes some of them, basically, in order to, snap some of them shut, basically, in order to freak her out. She screams. We see one wolf run out. We think that wolf is supposed to be Navarre, but I guess it's a different wolf that got trapped. And Isabeau, actually, she knows how to do things. She springs the trap onto César's head, killing him. Rest in peace, Alfred Molina.
And she is so dispassionate when she looks over him. And but again, she sees the wolf pelts and realizes that this guy is hunting wolves, and so she whether or not she assumes it's the bishop or not, we sort of assume that she figures it out that the bishop is hunting wolves. And she's not content to just sit there and let Mouse figure it out or hope Navarre is safe because Navarre is big and strong. No, she's like, at night, my job is to protect him as a wolf. And so she hops on Goliath and she goes after Caesar, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. I would assume that this is not the first time she's killed somebody, whether to defend Navarre or herself.
Yeah, she's clearly got an edge to her that, and she doesn't have to be like, grr, look at how tough I am. It's just like, you just look at her and you go, wow, like she's been through some stuff.
Yeah, I mean, because it is very practical, right? I don't think it actually is stated exactly how much time has passed, is it?
I believe it was 3 years.
3 years, okay. Okay, so this is a pretty long time that she has gone from initially being, an upper class woman who probably did not initially have these kind of skills to being put in a position where every night she has to fend for herself in isolation. So it makes sense that she develops these skills and that she is kind of very practical about, how this works, essentially. And so that, she is, I would imagine, a very, very different person than she probably was 3 years before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that scene did a wonderful job of showing that. I like how this movie spends a lot of time giving you insights into backstory without having to bog things down with flashbacks.
Yeah. So the next morning, Navarre is dragging Philippe behind him, and they talk a little bit, although not in very much detail, about what happened the previous evening.
Mouse definitely leaves them some omissions, intentional omissions.
Yes. But we do get this interesting little bit where Hawk Isabeau now especially likes Mouse, that she actually flies to him instead of to Navarre initially. He's like a little bit jealous, it seems like, for a moment, but he's basically like, look, she's fantastic. I definitely am kind of into her, but she only talks about you.
Yeah, he diffuses that pretty quick because, not only is Navarre jealous, but we've already established that Navarre is ready to murder other suitors. And so there's look on Mouse's face like, oh no, don't go away, bird, go to him, not me, help you don't put me in this situation.
Navarre, and he bond a bit. He tells him basically, there's this very sad line, right, that he says, do you know that hawks and wolves mate for life? The bishop didn't even leave us that, right, that he couldn't even say like, all right, you're both wolves now.
Mm-hmm.
Imperius is followed and begs Navarre to listen to him, and Philippe's basically like, come on, you could just wait a day, what's it gonna hurt? And Navarre is basically like, yeah, fuck that.
Obviously there's resentment against Imperius.
Which is fair.
I also got the impression that Navarre was ready to do this, and is almost ready to do it today to spite them for asking him to wait.
Yeah.
Because remember, Navarre is convinced that if he kills the bishop, the curse is over. Whereas Imperius is telling them if you kill the bishop, then it's forever.
The curse will never be over. Right.
And so I think he almost he's being entrenched into his idea of what needs to happen.
Yeah, that it does very much emphasize, and that he has this kind of insistence upon doing what it is that he wants to do, and this resistance to listening to them. So Philippe decides basically that the better route is to tell Isabeau that he thinks that they can break the curse. So he and Imperius are digging this hole in the hopes of trapping Wolf Navarre in there. But instead, he falls through the weak ice into the river, and Philippe ends up having to go and rescue both him and Isabeau. This is where they are using the this like sword as an anchor in the ice.
Yeah, they stab it into the ice and tie a rope around it as if it was a python.
It's like, oh god.
It's so bad to the sword.
And Isabeau is clearly on board with basically like, yeah, we need to break this curse. I can't do this anymore. This is rough. We have this kind of brief moment where they see each other and can touch hands when they're both humans for like 35 seconds, essentially. And
this is where this is pretty much the only spot where the movie doesn't age well, because the special effects of them changing from wolf to bird and bird to wolf, even on the tower scene where it was kind of implied like, she was falling, and then she was like screaming, and then there was bird noises, and then she flapped away after a cutscene. In this one, they literally hold on each character and do a sort of a wipe overlay dissolve thing, and it doesn't look
great.
They give Howard like what look more like cat eyes than wolf eyes as part of their transformation. it was very heart-wrenching. This is also where we get to see that, Navarre does have deep-seated well of emotion.
Yeah. And so the next day, he wakes up. He's not pleased for a number of reasons. He's not pleased about that whole situation. He's not pleased about the fact that Philippe tells him that his sword is missing and has, fallen into the water and been lost forever, this, priceless family heirloom that they've been throwing around. But he sees the wolf claw marks on Philippe's chest, and Imperius tells him, yeah, he got that while he was saving your life from drowning. So, maybe don't be a dick. And at this point, basically, Navarre kind of gives in to their whole plan, essentially, that he's like, all right, fine, you can try it your thing, sort of.
And I don't know if it's because he feels indebted to Mouse because of saving his life, or if seeing Isabeau, though it sort of was obviously overwhelming, was just enough to be like, if this is possible.
Yeah.
Obviously, he hasn't seen Isabeau's face in years.
Right.
Did seeing it would be just enough to be like, just a taste of possible freedom was just enough to be like, well, okay, even if you guys are crazy and what you're saying makes no sense, what's tomorrow versus today for stabbing a man to death? So,
right. Yeah, you can stab a man to death any day.
Even if it was a rough go of it, it does convince him to try out the plan of this whole day-night thing, night-day, which no one understands yet.
Right. They sneak into the city. Philippe has, snuck in the way he came out and is getting into the cathedral that way. Meanwhile, Imperius and Isabeau are sneaking in with a caged wolf, which initially the guard is basically like, I'll kill this wolf. And then he's like, I've never killed a wolf before. And then Imperius is like, that's just what the bishop was saying, but I'm sure he'll forgive you for depriving him of the pleasure. He seems like a very forgiving man.
Yeah, and the bishop's man is like, oh, yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, it's like, okay, that's fine.
They sneak in at night. So the big key here is that they needed Philippe to get inside because, as you said, you can't get in or out of the fortress of Aguilas, so you have to have someone on the inside open the door for you. That is the conceit behind this sort of caper. They've got their mini Ocean's 11 scheme going on here.
Right. So that, he has to get into the cathedral to open the door. They're like cathedral fortress. I have some thoughts. Navarre, meanwhile, as, he becomes himself again as night turns into day, he basically at this point is like, what the hell? You told me that if I came on this day as opposed to yesterday, we're going to have this whole thing where it was going to be neither night nor day somehow, and clearly that's not how it's happened, right? Clearly where it's just a regular day like any other.
And Navarre got high expectations because he didn't have much to go on. And Imperius didn't tell him that, hey, you kind of need to wait for this specific thing. This is a specific time of day. He woke up from wolf form. Now he's inside Aguila and he's expecting to see Isabeau and he isn't. And he's already emotionally fragile because they've sort of broken his world by giving him a chance to see Isabeau. He's already conceded, which is clearly difficult for him to change his plan. And then, he feels kind of like they duped him. And it's clear that he feels duped.
And this is actually why I will say, in terms of Imperius not giving him a lot of information to go on, this is why my theory, again, is he hasn't done research and looked at almanacs and found out anything. I think he's just had some sort of weird dream vision, and he doesn't actually know what they're looking for or expecting any more than anybody else, because God or whoever didn't give him a ton to go on.
That would explain it.
Yeah, and so he believes that something is going to happen, but it's not like he has the real knowledge to be able to say, just wait, I promise that this is how it's going to happen, and it's just going to, have to wait a couple hours or whatever. That's
true. I think that's, as much as this movie is tight and puts a lot of information into a small space, this is one situation wherein if they were to have given us at least one line to explain that, where he would literally said, I don't know how to give you more information. All I had was a vision, something like that.
Yeah.
We would have, as the audience, a little more reason not to sort of quibble over why he's being so vague.
Right.
Which gives plenty of reason for Navarre to make his horrible request to Imperius.
Yes. Yeah, that he should kill Isabeau if he fails, and that's real depressing.
it would be worse to live a half-life than
Yeah.
anything else. He comes from a reasonable point of view in that if he goes to kill the bishop and he fails, I mean, he's not going to live through that. Either he's going to die in the attempt or he'll be hung.
And I'm assuming he's planning I kind of assuming that if he does kill the bishop but it doesn't break the curse, I kind of assume he was just going to kill himself. But that he couldn't bring himself to kill Isabeau, and so he's like, I'm going to make this guy do it.
Yeah, definitely. But I just kind of imagine that it was kind of an all or nothing, because I don't think he was convinced that killing the bishop was going to keep the curse there. I don't think he was ever convinced of that. So I think in his mindset, if he didn't succeed, it was because he was dead. And then now Isabeau has nothing to look forward to on the evenings.
Yeah.
While he, probably should have consulted her about whether or not she wanted to be dead.
Yeah. He makes a lot of decisions for her in general.
He is kind of a bossy dude.
So Philippe is getting himself into the church. He has kind of got into this grate, but of course it takes some effort to get up through the grate, especially if people are standing on the grate, and at some point he kind of starts stabbing upward through the grate, and some poor guy who's standing on top of it, he's basically like, there are rats in this church, what is Aquila coming to?
I love how he's also got this tiny little Renaissance stiletto that he's poking this guy in the foot with. It looks more like a letter opener than anything else. But yeah, I love how the guy who's standing there is like, ugh, rats, gross.
But that is really all he needs, right? I mean, he doesn't want to do something that's going to lead them to look down and see him.
No.
So his instrument is actually exactly sufficient for what he is trying to do, which is basically just to get the guy to leave so that he can come up through the grate.
And we do have to remember, this is a super tiny grate, and this is another one of those foreshadowings. The grate that comes up through the floor into the cathedral is the same, super tiny square that he squeezed down through in his cell. So in the cell, that was one thing when they were talking to the crazy man that was his cellmate. They looked down at this tiny little grate, and the guard's like, well, he didn't get out that way. The crazy man said he went down there, but you couldn't fit a human being down there. And then it's the same size grate that he comes up through. Yeah. And he does actually find this cathedral grate during his escape.
Yes.
He did come up and found himself in the cathedral and was like, oh, well, this isn't going to help me any. But he actually gets his feet stepped on the first time around. And then now he gets to poke people's feet, which I thought was a nice little bookend there. Yeah.
Good for him. So he has to, now that he's gotten out, he has to unlock the inexplicably completely barred doors of the church during Mass?
Well, if we go and assume that A, his country is in starved, impoverished, borderline revolt because he's a horrible administrator, and he's possibly even in the process of being defrocked and removed by Rome, and he's managed to simply, by force of personality, maintain his inner sanctum of guards, well, I mean, maybe he does want to lock himself in every single room.
I could see why, if it was just he was hanging out in, his palace or whatever, that he would be completely barred in. It seems weird that there are all of these regular people who are attending Mass and that he's locked them all in there together.
No, fair point. Maybe they're only the people he trusts. Maybe the only people that are inside. It's an invitation-only Mass, possibly.
Right, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. It does seem really weird. It's clearly in service of the story more than in service of the characters. And I love how the cathedral doors are. It's literally like a castle door. It's got locks and bars and bolts, and of course, it is guarded by literal guards. Mm-hmm. It's something that happens. They're riding horses through Aquila and stuff, and there's always just guards just standing around in random places, and they're always holding their sword center chest, as if that's something that's practical for 8 hours to stand with your arms holding up your sword. And they're random hallways. Right. Oh, there's a guard there, and there's one point where there's a gate and a raised level and a bridge, and then there's this little house, and there's a guard just standing on top of it, because he was clearly on screen.
Why not?
But where he was made no sense whatsoever.
So Navarre, of course, manages to get past the guards, right? And initially he's like, I'm your captain. I order you to stand down. And it looks like that actually kind of works for at least a couple of people, and a couple of people he kind of shakes a sword at, and, he gets through.
Well, I think it also goes to show that he was probably a good captain of the guard, and Marquette is probably a bad one.
Yeah.
So he's playing on his old loyalties, and in any regime change, you change all the captains and the sergeants, but the Joe Blows might be the same, and here comes this opportunity for, if I just happen to not stand in the way, maybe he'll kill the bad boss and I'll have a good boss again.
Right.
If he fails to kill the bad boss, there's only so much that they can punish me for just not standing in the way of a man who I know would be able to kill me in a sword fight. So,
right. But it is one of those interesting moves where I think that totally makes sense, but that up until this point, all of the guards have seemed essentially cartoonishly evil. And so it is this kind of like quick, just very quick, like, well, at this moment, we're gonna switch on that one.
But all the guards they've encountered so far have been in the countryside, which means they are probably the ones that are less loyal, because those are the ones that you kept at home, because you can't trust them when they're out and about. If they're Camp Navarre, and it's still been just a few years since you've had the upheaval, Marquette probably takes his guys, the ones who he knows, out with him. So I'm wondering if maybe it's just the guys in garrison were all the ones who had more loyalty to Navarre. Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. He jauntily rides on into the cathedral.
I love seeing that they actually use dressage. There's a bunch of different ways that you can move a horse, and dressage is an evolution of being able to use a horse in battle, teaching it to kick, teaching it to walk sideways. And what he walks in there is a display of prowess. He is showing off that he is clearly still in control of all of his martial skills, and it's an intimidation tactic.
The thing I found much kind of sillier, though, was the fact that they literally just like do a joust for a while in a way that feels very, a performative tournament sort of thing and not a actual battle sort of thing.
The choreography in this, especially in this fight scene, looks to me like it was done by someone who ran a medieval times dinner theater show.
Yes.
They're not really even jousting because they never pull out lances or anything. They're just
they're like
just
jousting
fighting
with
on
swords.
Horseback. Yeah, and I mean you can hack at somebody from the back of a horse with a sword. That's not unreasonable. But what unreasonable is, like, the only thing he decides to put on for his final battle when it comes to protection is the most ridiculous helmet ever.
Oh my god, that helmet!
And he does wear Isabeau's favorite, though. From the very beginning, when he pulls that piece of cloth out, he is now wearing this in this fight, which is very cool.
That's nice.
And the way they ride their horses, the way they fight, honestly, even really the way that all the guards were dressed, it was very much reminiscent of medieval times dinner theater. And the helmet, that is a terrible helmet. It is so awful.
I mean, because it has all of the visibility issues of a great helm, but with less protection. Because it's just this, like, series of grates.
Right. Yeah, and so he should be wearing, like, if he wasn't wearing a great helm, he would be wearing a bassinet. And, it would have that sort of onion top point, and it would cover your cheeks, it would cover the sides of your head, it would cover the nape of your neck, and obviously the visor would cover your face. And if you didn't have a visor that came below your nose, you'd have either a bever plate, or you'd have a actual separate bever, or something like that. You know what it reminds me of? You know those barred glasses that LMFAO wears?
Yes. It's those, but a helmet. It's
but a helmet
weird.
Visor. It's terrible. And then they even, I think you put it in your notes, how they double down on how bad it is by actually putting the helmet visor on the camera for a POV shot.
That we get this, like, shot through it that is just like, this is so impractical.
Yeah, it's awful. Like, it's actually easier to see through vertical bars than it is through horizontal bars. So a lot of the oculara you see on visors that have slits in them, you'll see vertical bars.
Right.
And this thing is just, it's all wrong in all ways, shape, or form. But maybe it's because my aesthetics have been far too manipulated by actual medieval visuals, but it doesn't even look cool.
No, I think it looks very weird, honestly.
It's awful. I hated that helmet so much.
Yes, the helmet was bad. As I said, the fact that, like, I mean, they're just, like, running back and forth sort of at each other, kind of pointing a sword in the other person's direction for, like, several passes. So as I said, it's, like, weird jousting with a sword, and it makes no sense for two people who are actually in a battle trying to kill each other.
And who have any idea what they're doing. I don't know. I think it's great that they're riding horses around inside the cathedral. I think that's...
Right.
Because what we acknowledged that Marquette shows up in his own horse.
Yeah.
Like, someone says, hey, he's got a horse, and it's like, well, I have a horse too, so.
Yeah. Oh, and Marquet has the same stupid helmet, but
Yes, he
his
does.
is gold.
Yeah.
and Navarre's is silver.
Yes, this
So
is
they're
true.
really doubling down on this, like, dub helmet being, like, what people are allegedly wearing in late 14th century Italy.
When they finally go to ground, though, the fight improves somewhat. It returns.
Yeah.
The foot combat choreography is a whole lot less wackadoo than their horse-mounted one.
And at some point, Philippe fetches his sword, which is, surprise, totally fine, and, throws that at him, so he's able to finish the fight with that.
The sword was wrapped up and put underneath the cart, and it seems that either he himself or he and Imperius together had conspired to hopefully, by removing the sword, remove some of Navarre's interest in slaying the bishop to get his gem.
Right. Which I found to be kind of bizarre because, while obviously sure he wants the gem, he's not really doing this for the gem.
No, that he's not. But perhaps, even if he wasn't doing it for the gem as his primary motivator, I think they were trying to give him obstacles to his original plan,
Yes.
which would encourage him to adopt their plan. And I also think it's interesting that Philippe literally throws him his sword in the middle of the fight with Marquette, and then it goes almost completely ignored. Like, he never actually picks it up to fight Marquette. They just sort of fight around it.
Right. And Marquet actually has no interest in picking it up, too, because there are multiple moments where Marquet's, like, right there and actually could grab it if he wanted to, and he never does.
No one goes after the sword. It just sits there.
And the eclipse finally happens.
Yay,
That's
now
what
we
it
can get to
means
the
for
big surprise.
for there to be a night without day, a day without night. So the eclipse finally happens.
And this is the final nail in the 1386 coffins. The eclipse happens, so it is now January 1st, 1386. There was an actual documented eclipse. Now, the thing about eclipses is that there are eclipses all the time.
Right.
But a lot of times it happens over the ocean, or it happens at a very small radian in that only a narrow number of people can see it. As much as there are crazy people who would disagree with us, the curvature of the Earth means that not everyone can see the eclipse at the exact same time.
Right.
Every time there's an eclipse, there's only a narrow band of places on the planet that can see it.
Yeah.
Not only on January 1st, 1386, was there a total eclipse. The total eclipse tracked straight through, funnily enough, it's tracked through where the Kingdom of Navarre used to be, and right through the dead center of Italy. So when you look at the map, I actually went and pulled up the map. It goes right across the north of Spain, south of France, and then it cuts across the Mediterranean, goes right through the guts of the boot where Aquila actually currently is, and then it heads off, and then goes off into Eastern Europe, and then ends across Russia somewhere.
Cool.
Again, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but this is the what I would say the closing of the crazy pinboard that 1386 is where the final battle happens.
All right.
I just think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's awesome. I will take that as definitive proof of the January 1386 end date of the film.
Yes. So anyway, they do have their eclipse, which means that both of them are human at the same time, which they lucked out because there's no real reason why they shouldn't both be a wolf and a hawk at the same time.
Right. That's actually a good point. I was kind of wondering, ooh.
It was a 50-50 shot.
Yeah. Navarre is freaking out for a bit because Navarre seems to be under the impression for some reason that Imperius actually would have listened to him and killed Isabeau, which I don't think is accurate. He grabs the sword that Philippe was kind enough to bring to him, and he kills Marquet with that, and then approaches the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
And the bishop's like, oh, you can't kill me, then the curse will die with me. And then Navarre's like, yeah, well, Isabeau's dead, so. But then Isabeau, very not dead, appears. I guess by confronting the bishop together, it means you just make the bishop, look at them both for a while, and that does it?
Well, because now he sees them both as people, I'm guessing, is what happens. He never wanted to see them... That's the whole idea behind the curse, is he never wanted to see them together as people because he was so jealous.
And now he has to.
And now he has been confronted by them both together as people. Did he need to see them embraced or anything like that? He saw them physically be people, and so now they're no longer a animal and a man at the same time, or an animal and a woman at the same time. They're now people at the same time, and so the whole idea behind his evil curse is undone.
Right, but the curse is only broken because they did that in front of him specifically. Like, if they had an eclipse and they'd had the eclipse in the neck and hung out together in the next town over, that would have been a very nice afternoon, but then the curse would have gone back to normal.
That is my understanding of it, yes.
It's nice. I found it a tiny bit anticlimactic as, like, a curse-breaking moment.
I can see that.
But, it's very nice. I'm very happy for them.
Yes. However, someone else is not particularly happy for them.
Oh no, the bishop is not happy. She drops her hawk leash at his feet. He's just infuriated, and he goes to kill her, kind of murmuring, like, "No man shall."
This is where the priest spear comes back into things. So he literally is holding on to the device with which he's going to now stab her with. And we saw that device earlier in the movie. And the scene also wraps up something else we saw earlier in the movie. In that when the bishop goes to stab Isabeau, we get our crossbow greatsword happen again. And it is only by javelining the sword through the bishop's chest and literally impaling him against furniture that they finally defeat him. And one thing I like is that when it's used to solve the problem at the end of the movie, if he suddenly can throw his sword, it's a little bit implausible. But when we establish in a scene where it doesn't solve necessarily the conflict of the movie, it's like, oh, we don't need to know how he learned to throw a sword, because in that earlier scene, like, okay, so he can throw a sword, whatever. Why he can do it, we don't care because it's been established. So I liked that a lot. Same thing with, why does the bishop carry a spear around? Well, we don't really know why he does, but we're already aware that he is that kind of crazy guy.
Yes. I will note that's not what's normal. That's not how a crozier normally works.
No, I'm certain not. Yeah, I don't go to church often enough to know, but I'm fairly certain, even in my lack of experience with churches, that they typically carry around armored religious paraphernalia. Right.
You can see croziers in museums as well. They typically don't have a spear at the end. It's just to stab everybody.
Has anyone unscrewed the end cap to be sure? We'll see. We have to test them all.
Yeah, so he's dead. Everybody's very happy. Navarre comments on the fact that she has cut her hair. So, we also have confirmation that the short haircut is something that happened at some point in the last 3 years while she was doing her own situation at night. I do find it a little funny that she calls him Navarre and not, like, his first name.
Right. Yeah. The thing is that if she had called him Etienne at the very end, maybe people would have no idea who she was talking to, because we only hear him called Etienne like twice in the whole movie.
Yeah. So that is probably why they did it, but I just find it very amusing.
It is funny.
They thank Philippe and Timperius, who also basically walk off holding hands, and everybody's very happy. It's very nice.
A nice indication that you can have platonic physical contact amongst men. It was a nice jab at there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just something that modern society should probably get on board with. So it was a very nice resolution. The one thing you see at the end is, Philippe has this ongoing conversation with God throughout the whole thing, where he's mostly talking to himself, and he uses conversations with God to justify his actions. But as part of blending into the background of this cathedral scene, he puts on this white roby thing that the acolytes were wearing, the little altar boys were wearing. And so now he's still wearing it. He's walking out with the now redeemed priest. And so it gives some overtones to, has he reformed himself? Is he going to go and live a non-thiefy life? I don't know if it necessarily assumes that he's going to become a priest, but at least maybe has he moved on from that chapter?
Right. So at this point, we can get into some of the things the film got right and wrong. And we've already talked about a few of them in terms of our costuming and our helmet and stuff. I will note that the architecture is mostly not bad.
Well, it helps that they filmed in actual castles.
Well, yeah, exactly. And like most of the things you see are things that, are buildings that, from the ones that I looked up and from the ones that I could just guess based on the architecture, etc. These are buildings that would have existed by 1386. There is one wall fresco at some point that I bet is also just the downside in filming in real buildings is that real buildings don't keep a kind of pure adherence to what they looked like when they were first built. And so there is this wall fresco that looks to me like probably 17th century, maybe late 16th.
Is it the one that's in the cathedral behind the bishop? It's like a big wall painting? Yeah.
Yeah, and it has it's kind of like a floral vegetal motif.
Right. Yeah, you see a lot more like geometric patterns in wall paintings of the 14th century than you do see like, obviously there are frescoes and things, and it is Italy, so there's something to be said for that. But another thing that you get into trouble with when you're filming in actual old buildings, and it wasn't so bad for Imperius's castle, but a lot of times when you have a 500-year-old building, it shows 500 years of wear. But if it's supposed to be a 50-year-old building, you know, you see bare stone walls instead of all the whitewashing and things like, which they would look subtly different. But it's a whole lot better than some sets that we've seen that were built to look pseudo medieval and foam masonry blocks glued to the wall kind of thing.
And I did have one note on Imperius's castle, since this is a real castle that they filmed in. It is the castle of Roccacalaccio, which is in the Italian province of L'Aquila. This is it's something that I often comment on, the fact that you have these castles, right, that are like, it's, a 10th century castle, and it's like, wow, it's the 12th century and it's already in ruins. And I will say that this castle, while it would have been in better shape in 1386, it was left in ruins after a 1461 earthquake.
Okay.
So its bad shape does go back to the Middle Ages, if not quite that far.
And obviously, I don't think the castle was meant to be used in its own timeline, and it definitely did represent some old, a ruins that he had retreated to, and it definitely had that look to it.
Right. So I also had some comments on geography and on local politics.
I'm actually very curious to hear what you have to say about this, because this is, as much as I am aware of like hierarchy and feudal structures and what kind of the politics of certain places should be, there's a point at which I kind of don't go much deeper than that, especially in Italy.
There's a couple things that I will say actually weirdly maybe sort of make sense. The town of Aquila, which is today L'Aquila, so there's a kind of L apostrophe that's been added in front of it, but I believe it would have just been Aquila in the Middle Ages. So this is a real city in central Italy that was founded by Frederick II in around 1240, basically kind of built up out of a few villages that were already existent in the area. And the city's construction was mostly completed, and it was recognized officially by Conrad IV, the Holy Roman Emperor, in 1254. And then became an episcopal see in 1257. The politics of Italy in the Middle Ages are pretty much always consistently a little bit of a mess.
Well, that's because you have the whole papal states and the feudal states and the maritime states, and there was just a whole lot of pretty much cities that were their own semi-autonomous confederacy of getting along or not getting along. It was kind of mushy.
Right, and the Holy Roman Emperor has periods of more actively being involved in Italy than others. We, of course, have a number of kind of urban and regional conflicts in Italy between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, the forces that are pro-papal versus pro-imperial. So it's complicated, and of course, Italy as a country will not exist for several hundred years. Aquila is along the northern border of the Kingdom of Sicily. And the Kingdom of Sicily is actually under the rule of the Counts of Anjou for a substantial amount of time. So they would have taken over the control of the Kingdom of Sicily in 1286. They lose the island of Sicily in the War of the Sicilian Vespers, 1280, which is 1282 to 1302, but by the end of that, they've pretty much definitively lost control of the island, which ends up being incorporated effectively into the Crown of Aragon, which is my main geographical area in what is now northeastern Spain. But the Angevins, the Counts of Anjou, maintained control over the mainland part of the kingdom. They continue in practice to refer to this as the Kingdom of Sicily, even though in practice also they're referring to the southern island as the Kingdom of Sicily. So there's actually two kingdoms of Sicily, which are completely separate political entities for a while. Sometimes this kingdom on the mainland is referred to as the Kingdom of Naples. So There's a lot of extra complication there, but it actually does make sense that the Count of Anjou is around in 1386 in Aquila because it's part of a kingdom that is in fact under his rule.
So they got that right, which is, I wonder, I almost feel like you'd have to have done some research to stumble accidentally on that name as being related to the local areas.
Right. So I do find that impressive. And so that actually does make a lot of sense and explains in part some of the general French presence that we see in terms of names. So I'm going to try and tease out a little more about what's happening there and what does and doesn't make sense. The thing that I will note that feels a little weird is that this then means that Isabeau d'Anjou is like, because her father's dead. I'm like, is she supposed to be like the queen and nobody's noticed?
Right.
Or that, like, is her brother the king now and, like, nobody's noticed that, like, she's missing into Hawke?
If she is older than her brother and her brother wants to retain power, then perhaps not knowing where she is benefits him.
I mean, she would probably still, even if she's older, if it's her brother, then he would probably still be given control anyway.
Until she gets married.
When then there might be a fight about it, depending on exactly what the circumstances were. But certainly, like, there would be some possibility that already they'd kind of anticipated that, that the younger brother would probably still potentially supplant an older sister. If it's a cousin, that actually would get much messier. And I haven't looked up exactly what exactly would have been happening with kind of who's running things precisely in 1386. But her family is running things.
Willful ignorance from someone could be a plausible answer to why they have not spent as much effort into finding her again. And, clearly the bishop is politically powerful. Otherwise, he would not be able to get away with nearly as much as he has, even assuming that he didn't get away with everything. So it's also very possible that he either intimidated or coerced or convinced someone of something that they have not yet double-checked his, they haven't fact-checked him. It's also plausible that the bishop is part of why no one's come and looked for her.
Right. So that does potentially make sense in the context of the film. I will note, however, in terms of the accuracy overall, while it is not out of the norm in the Middle Ages in general for bishops to have this kind of power where they're acting as secular rulers of various territories, Aquila specifically, that does not seem to have been the case. The bishop does not seem to have been that big of a deal overall as things go in local politics. There's a city council that's quite powerful, that there are also on and off various people, including people who basically start off as something like the captain of the guards, who are effectively running things in the city. So the fact that, like, this guy, so it doesn't map onto anything that was happening really in Aquila, as far as I can tell. And also the fact that this bishop has managed to maintain so much power with no evident, at least in the film, support from the king of Naples/Sicily, whatever you want to call it right now. And that he's actively being opposed by the Pope.
And he's having trouble with money because of the famine and having overtaxed his people. It does definitely stretch there's some criminal masterminding going on that doesn't necessarily comport with reality.
Right. So the political dynamics are sort of more in the realm of fantasy than reality, I think. But it is interesting that we have this Anjou presence. The Kingdom of Navarre, by this date, would have actually also separately been under French rule. So that actually does make sense that he is Etienne. It makes sense that, he would have a French name, potentially, if he's somebody who's, connected in some way with, like, the royal house of Navarre. It's weird if he's connected with the royal house of Navarre that he would be a random captain of the guard in Aquila. If he's just from Navarre, that makes it a little bit less likely that he would have a French name, but makes it make more sense that he's basically like a mercenary who ended up as a captain of the guard in Aquila.
Yeah, and especially because it's implied that his father is dead. So, and if perhaps there was some problem with him maintaining a inheritance or there could have been problems with his lands back, assuming he was even landed, because again, we don't ever hear him called Sir, so...
No, we really don't know very much about him.
We know very little, except that he has the ability to fight, and he has grown accustomed to telling people what to do. And both of those things don't necessarily require any actual heritage of any importance.
So I think I can kind of allow that he potentially also Marquet are mercenaries, that he's, let's say from Nevada, Marquet, based on the name, I would say probably also supposed to be French. The thing that I actually find strangest is that sure, people move around, but somebody like Philippe Gaston, this like random thief, it seems a little weird that if he is French, which you would think by his name, that he would have found it necessary to go quite so far from home.
Right. We don't know whether or not he's from Aquila,
right,
or if he's from elsewhere and came here. He did talk about the 300 some odd mile journey, which I'm guessing is insinuating that that's how you get outside of the bishop's authority.
Right.
I don't know if he has, maybe he's going back to family, but that is a long just travel, and we don't know why he was traveling so far from anywhere that you would have gotten reasonably been given a French name, both a first and a surname, to then come over to be in central Italy.
And it's not like there aren't a lot of, assuming he is from, honestly, based on the name, I would even say probably more likely to be northern France even than southern France. Mm-hmm. It's a long way to have gone, and there are a lot of cities closer to home for him to have kind of lost himself in as a thief, even if maybe the city that he's from originally he had to kind of take off from.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if just using French names made it sound European-ish to American audiences.
That's my guess, yeah.
The motivating factor behind the names. And then if you pick a theme, people won't pick apart that you have Italian names and French names and German names. If you go all French names, then they'll be like, oh, they're all sound like medieval European people.
Yeah, right. So I would assume it's probably, something like that it's just, they're just all vaguely French names, fine. So I did want to talk also, though, about the name Imperius.
It sounds Latin-y, and it sounds, but that's about it. I don't know Latin, but I'm familiar enough to have noticed in my rewatching that it's not an actual Latin word.
Right.
But I don't know if it's an actual name.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not a Latin word. It's obviously related to Latin words, but it's not actually literally a real Latin word. And the only instance that I have come across of anything even close to that as a name is actually a Greek chivalric romance, where there is a central character who is referred to as Imperios with an, transliterated with an O, or even Imberios instead, so transliterated with a B and then an O. And that name is actually, it's not a real name either, exactly. It's essentially a Greek corruption of the French Pierre in terms of, the French chivalric romance that this Greek chivalric romance was based on.
Oh, well, there you go. So it was made up to sound cool.
Basically. But there's a fun connection, though, in that the other central character of that chivalric romance is a princess of Naples.
Oh, there you go. But not named Isabel.
No. Her name was Margarona. And I think it maybe was Marguerite originally, or I can't remember. I didn't actually write that down.
But that would track.
Yeah. The other thing that I will note is that in addition to not being a name, Imperius doesn't even really make sense to me as a name, especially for a monk, because it is a word that connotes, command, power, rulership in terms of the Latin words that Imperius sounds like, at least. Mm-hmm. So it's a weird name for a monk when they're supposed to be focusing on obedient, obeying other people as opposed to having people obey them. I found it sort of odd.
I've never really thought about it. It just sounds different than everybody else. And I wonder if that's the idea, is that everyone else has these French names, and then he's got this very different name, because he does fulfill, when you think about the fairy tale, because this is clearly a fairy tale. And when you think about the fairy tale trope, he's the fairy godmother, the wizard in the hedge. He's that outsider character that they go to for specialized help.
Yeah.
The characters require him, but he's kind of otherworldly. And that name separates him from the rest of the cast in that it just sounds different. Clearly something that's not a regular person's name.
Yeah.
If we do get the bishop's name, I don't recall what it is. So
no, I don't believe
we never do get his name. So we assume that he probably has a Frenchy style name as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's an interesting choice, and I think that is really probably what it is it's just a kind of essentially randomly chosen Latin-ish name meant to distinguish him. And I will just say a fun fact in terms of his hermit-like experience is that there is indeed a famous hermit associated with L'Aquila, who is Pietro da Morone, who would be consecrated in Aquila as Pope Celestine V in 1294, before resigning 3 months later because he decided he liked being a hermit more than he liked being pope. But instead of being allowed to live as a hermit in peace, the next Pope, Boniface VIII, captured him, worried that people would want to go back to him, captured him, and maybe or maybe not had him murdered / maltreated him enough that he died prematurely.
Oh, that's rough. But, I mean, I guess if being a hermit and living in a cell are more similar than necessarily having to have responsibility. Not that I'm guessing he liked it any better, but there are worse things to happen. I mean, he wasn't then, brought back from the dead for trial, because popes have done some weird stuff.
True.
So, he's got that going for him.
Though Dante does place him in hell because he thinks it's inappropriate that he refused the papacy and also therefore paved the way for Boniface to take over because Dante hates Boniface VIII.
Ooh. Oh, well, that sucks to be him, I guess.
Yeah, so according to Dante, at least, this poor guy really just wanted to be left
live
alone.
In a rock on his own, yeah.
Yeah, and then they bullied him into being pope, and then they bullied him into not being pope, and then Dante's like, well, now you're in hell forever. Have a great time.
Well, dang.
Poor dude. So the next thing I wanted to chat about for the Historia ad Veritas, where I talk about a real historical event, person, or phenomena, is I wanted to talk about werewolves, because there are actually a lot of medieval legends about werewolves.
There are, and so one thing I found interesting is if you watch the movie, and I don't know if this was meant to be an homage to lycanthropy or not, but the moon is almost, I think with the exception of one scene, if the moon is seen in this movie, it's always full.
That's interesting. So we have a lot of stories in particular from around the 12th century, which Caroline Walker Bynum in her book Metamorphosis and Identity described as the werewolf renaissance of the 12th century, which is maybe one of the better phrases I've ever heard.
Oh, I love that.
Right? So this includes a couple of fun stories. So one is from Gerald of Wales, who talks about this bizarre story, which is basically this priest runs across some werewolves. So the priest is just sitting around, and then it says, a wolf came up to them and immediately broke into these words, "Do not be afraid." They were completely astounded and in great consternation. The wolf then said some things about God that seemed reasonable, and took them to his companion, a she-wolf groaning and grieving like a human being, even though her appearance was that of a beast. She requested the sacrament, and to remove all doubt, the he-wolf pulled all the skin off the she-wolf from the head down to the navel, folding it back with his paw as if it were a hand, and immediately the shape of an old woman, clear to be seen, appeared.
Ooh, so pulling their wolf skin on and off, that's very reminiscent of Selkie myths in Irish mythology. Oh, nice.
So, and there are these really interesting concerns that pop up, and as the text goes on, also are kind of brought up about essentially, basically, how human these beings are. Mm-hmm. It's in part, they're kind of presented as more human because it's this skin that you can just kind of take on and off. It's not this really full transformation. And also that even as wolves, they're chatting like people, right? That it's that the wolf shows up and says some things about God that seem reasonable, and they're like, okay.
I mean, hey, if you're gonna convince a bunch of priests that you're worth talking to, that's probably your best route.
Right, but so that the wolf, even in wolf form, has this fundamental humanity. The wolfness is also, presented as a skin that you can take on and off, and it is ultimately seems reasonable to this priest that, okay, this wolf is human enough that I can allow them to take the Eucharist.
There's a story, because I'm not familiar with this story. When it comes to fairy tales, I went, in the very beginning of lockdown, I got sent home from work to work remotely, and my daughter was home doing school, and this school year they were far more well prepared for it, but at the very end of the previous school year, they pretty much just like, hey, we're going to email you a bunch of worksheets, hope for the best, right? So there wasn't a lot of schoolwork for kids in the elementary school age to do. And so I was trying to fill up time with my daughter, her Girl Scout troop, and stuff like that. And I started to do what was called story time with Uncle T. And so that I did this sort of part and parcel with the Turnip of Terror thing to try and do a little more pre-Disney look at fairy tales. So I went and I tried to find the oldest versions of many fairy tales we are familiar with and sort of interpret how they were originally told before they became kids' stories. And so you know, like when the Little Mermaid, when she bursts into sea foam at the end and things like that. While I haven't studied fairy tales hard enough to say I've known all of them, I did spend a whole lot of time reading, and I didn't find any, I can't think of any fairy tale that is similar to this one in that you have, now we do have lots of fairy tales and a lot of mythology about people who have been transformed into things to prevent them from a goal, usually a romantic goal. You've got the Irish myths about the people being turned into swans so that they can't have relationships and things like that, but never this like wolf-hawk dichotomy. So it's this is clearly made for the movie specifically, but I find it very interesting that there is, you know, I've never seen how far back lycanthropy myth goes. Do we have any indication in this time period where they were, you know, shedding their skins and were mostly human, if this was like we see it now, it's mostly considered a curse? Was this a choice, or was this a lot like medieval monsters who just sort of existed that way? And it was sort of, they weren't people, they were these werewolves that happened to be people-ish.
Yeah, so it is, I believe, somewhat later that you tend to have this emphasis on the werewolf as being this being who completely loses human reason, essentially. That in these kind of at least 12th century stories, that the emphasis does tend to be on often the fact that there is still something human about them. Actually, it is interesting. It's later, but it's also earlier that I believe Ovid actually has a kind of story, a kind of werewolf transformation story, which also kind of presents it as being as kind of having this that animal-like savagery.
So I think that's really cool, because knowing already that bird transformations are in mythology, that you know a mythology that would have been present in this time, the late 1300s, and to know that werewolfy versions, that means that while maybe not an actual story, all the elements of this fairy tale are plausibly medieval, in that this has all the elements which existed as a medieval fairy tale or mythology story was contemporaneously being made. That's awesome. I like that.
Yeah, and the one other thing actually that I wanted to note is that there is actually a 12th century werewolf story, which is actually making a distinction between different kinds of werewolves.
Oh, that's exciting. The taxonomy of werewolves?
Yeah, so that it basically starts by saying, so this is, it's Marie de France, and she basically starts by saying that, so there are these old stories that talk about werewolves, and it uses the term werewolf, and says that a werewolf is a savage beast while his fury is on him. He eats men, does much harm, goes deep into the forest to live. And then says, but that's enough of that for now. I want to tell you about the bisclavre, which is a different language. It's the Breton word for a werewolf. And that werewolf is about, like, a nice werewolf. And it's this knight who just keeps disappearing. And his wife is like, yo, why do you just keep disappearing for 3 days? For 3 days a week. It's actually not just a full moon thing. And she says, oh, well, that's when, and he says to her, oh, well, that's when I become a werewolf. It turns out that he actually does, though, when he is a werewolf, he is able to still behave in a human-like way. Like, he runs into the king and he, like, bows to the king because he knows that it's the king.
Huh. Oh, that's nice.
It's, this interesting, like, there are idea that there are different kinds of werewolves, and that some of them turn into complete savage beasts with no human reason, and others stay as these essentially kind of fundamentally human figures, even if they're in animal form.
And that does reflect a little bit what we see in this Ladyhawke movie, in that though they are maybe kind of a blend between the two, they do seem to retain some of their human principles, which is nice.
Yeah. And I will note that the word lycanthropy does presumably actually come from the Ovid narrative, since the individual who gets transformed into a wolf is Lycaon.
There we go.
So yes, werewolves. So I do think it is interesting that, yeah, while this isn't telling a story that specifically was circulating in the medieval world, it is, as you said, one that the pieces of it are such that a lot of it would have, I think, made sense to a medieval audience.
I like it.
Yeah. So at this point, we can move into the Fabula Nostra section, where we talk about a film or show perhaps inspired by this one. Would you like to go first?
Sure. So I find it very, like we were talking about, there's so much that goes into the backstory of this movie that we don't get to see a lot of. And what I kind of would like to see, though I don't know if it would have, I'd struggle to figure out how to come to some sort of resolution, is I would like to see the actual story of Navarre and Isabeau being caught. And so almost kind of like the prequel. And again, it's mostly because I find that their relationship is established mostly through intuition. Like we see that they are in love and we see that they care for each other and we see their devotion to each other, but we don't have, like, we have to just trust that it's there. And we don't have the framework for how it was established. And there is one scene that we didn't really talk about. Right before César shows up, the bishop is like in bed and he's having some sort of nightmare, and there's like this clicking noise, and there's like shadows, and it's like, is he being visited by whatever demon he made the spirit with, or is he just racked with guilt? And I would be very interested to see the story of, it's possible even that the bishop may have not been as evil before, and perhaps it was, did he have a descent into madness because of his love of Isabeau? So I think that could be a really fun story as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Even if you took these characters, removed the element that made it clearly a prequel, and just crafted a story about the love triangle between a bishop, a captain of the guard, a noble woman, and just that descent into chaos, I think that could itself make a very great movie. And instead of just being the backdrop that set up this movie. Yeah,
definitely. My version is much less serious and emotionally engaging. I really just, I'll often feel like I want more medieval comedies. Okay. And I also tend to often feel like I want more movies that really delve into some of the weirdness of the Middle Ages in ways that are often ignored and don't often show up on filmic versions of the medieval past. So really, I kind of want the semi-comedic story of these shape-shifting wolves and hawks that are just kind of wandering around, perhaps in this kind of like picaresque, like just like basically a kind of series of their adventures, and maybe like seeing them like, try to engage in medieval religious culture in some ways, like some wolves just popping up and trying to get a priest to allow them to take the Eucharist. So that's kind of what I want is I want something that has this kind of like engagement with some of the weird ways in which people are talking about werewolves in the medieval world as just these like, what do we do with them? How human are they? Do they get to take the Eucharist? What happens when a werewolf runs into the king? That's kind of what I want.
That would make a really good episodic comedy.
Yeah.
That would be great for that kind of series.
Yeah, definitely.
I'd watch it.
So I think that'd be fun. But this movie is, I think, really excellent overall, which moves into the estimatio or rating section. I actually am going to give this a 4 out of 5, which is pretty high for me. I tend to be a less than generous reviewer often. And I would say, the only real things that I will kind of ding it on is that in the tradition of fairy tales, the politics don't really make any sense. And in particular, don't really make any sense with the historical reality that's sort of surrounding it. And the other thing I will note is that I do think Isabeau is an excellent character and I like her. I, in general, tend to look slightly askance at movies that can't possibly manage to include more than one female character.
Well, that's true. I think the closest thing you get to another female character is in the background, but there are no other named female characters. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would also give it a 4 out of 5. And so I start from a position of 5 out of 5 purely for nostalgia purposes. It's a movie that I've grown up with and loved. A lot of the things that are entertaining to quibble about from historical authenticity standards are also ones that also fit within the realm of suspension of disbelief, especially when we're watching what is meant to be a fairy tale, sort of a fantasy setting. And especially since they've actually managed to stumble upon making a lot of these things that maybe if they're not quite right, are at least historically plausible.
Yeah.
What I find to be the biggest knock is that helmet.
Right.
I think I literally give it a full mark down for that helmet.
It's
and
bad.
So yeah, it's horrible. Even some of the other material culture issues are not so bad as that helmet. I just can't get over get over the helmet. But otherwise, I mean, I guess I'll roll the aging CGI of the pit scene into it. But otherwise, everything else is 5 out of 5.
Yeah, and I will say, I really enjoyed this movie. As I said before, this is the first time I'm watching it. I do not have any particular nostalgia, therefore, associated with it. But I think it does overall really hold up. I like the kind of fantasy setting. I think that the action sequences are really well done and are fun to watch, and they're also different from each other in a way that often I think you have a lot of films set in the Middle Ages that have like a bunch of showpiece battles, but they kind of all look the same.
True, and they don't all, with the exception of maybe the horseback part of the cathedral fight, they never go on too long. There's no Lord of the Rings, Helm's Deep, this is going to be half the movie, the battle is going to take forever. They're all fights, which, historical fights tended to resolve themselves fairly quickly. So there's no huge pitched battles, and everyone comports themselves, with the exception of recovering immediately from crossbow wounds, all comport themselves relatively realistically in how there's no superhero element to it, which
so I think that's well done. And I like the fact that it's a love story, but that we're kind of seeing it mostly through the lens of this figure who's a little bit kind of on the outskirts.
Yeah, the fact that our main character is not our protagonist. The protagonist is Isabeau Navarre, and he's our interpreter, and he's our link to the story and our narrator. And I like that a lot. They did it better than, say, like 300 did it, wherein the movie is technically being narrated by someone who wasn't there at the end, kind of thing. The story is being told to us, that movie. And while I think this movie did it a lot better than, say, that did, even though it's the same narrative style.
Right. Well, because I think in 300, it does that, but you never really care about that character. And this, it's, Mouse is not really who he's kind of on the outskirts of the story, but you still actually care about him and you want him to turn out okay.
Yes. He's less of a chorus and more of a character, but he's still a narrator, which I like. They did it very well. And this movie, I think, is undervalued in its storytelling because also, like I've mentioned a couple times while we've been talking, is it's very tight and things are set up and pay off. The continuity of this movie is, for movie standards, is fantastic. They don't introduce plot lines that just disappear. There's no characters that show up and then don't show up again for no particular reason.
It's very tight.
It is. It's a very well constructed movie. It was clearly thought out. Someone actually looked over the script and cared about the finished product. So
and there aren't any plots that seem just completely extraneous. I think it's very well done. I definitely really enjoyed it. So thank you very much for introducing me to it, or at least for getting me to watch it, since I had heard of but not seen it or really known anything about it previously.
Very happy to get to share it with people who haven't experienced it yet. So I'm glad you like it.
Well, thank you for coming on. And are there places where the listeners can find you on the internet?
Yes. So I do all my living history stuff through the Turnip of Terror, and I kind of just use that as the same moniker for everywhere. So there's the turnipofterror.com, which is kind of the central hub. Everything runs through the website. It's designed as a living history resource, so it's mostly tutorials on how to make your own garb. It's articles on living history concepts. It's resources for merchants and things like that. So people who want to get a basis for orienting themselves into doing actual living history and reenactment of the Middle Ages, that's what the website's for. I also have it on Facebook, and the Turnip of Terror, and Twitter and Instagram, and those I have a YouTube channel as well, and they all sort of formulate around the same concepts. Sharing news articles that are relevant to people who are doing living history impressions, and sharing pictures of other living history people doing cool outfits and activities and events. And my videos are mostly aimed towards helping people understand living history, or rather understand history in a living history lens, because I'm not in a position to teach history because I don't really know it well enough. I just know that I have seen the way other people interpret history, and some of it feels right, some of it feels wrong, and kind of help guide people down that path. And then I do technically have a podcast for the Turnip of Terror, but I don't post into it very much. I do most of my podcasting over on what's called How to Medieval, where Matt Blazek, he's the executive director of History Live Northeast. He does a lot of Agincourt era presentations at school and things, and we do a how-to podcast where we kind of talk about events and impressions and camp cooking and how to effectively do the medieval thing as a hobby.
And I will say also, I always think it's really interesting to talk to people who do this kind of living history, because I would say it's, really, we have kind of like different complementary areas of expertise, right? I mean, I don't necessarily just think as much about certain things along the lines of, what people wore and what those garments would feel like, except in a kind of very broad sense. Or, I know a lot about like food in terms of what people ate, but I'm not a lot about what, say, the experience of medieval cooking would be like. That, there's just a lot of things that you really kind of live that I, even as a social historian, don't often really access or experience.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think I like to say that living histories pretty much are only, if you study physics long enough, you'll realize that living histories are only access to time travel.
Right.
You go and you have the opportunity to kind of pretend for a moment, and when an event goes really well, and there's lose yourself, and you're like, okay, well, I think I had an evening that is plausibly similar to the experience of a medieval person in this similar context. Yeah. It's a really fun feeling, and so I enjoy it a lot. And it does, like you said, there's a lot of overlap, because there's an incredible amount of research that goes into making sure that what you do is authentic. You can make there's a lot of people who go out and do medieval-ish stuff, is what I like to say. There's Ren fairs, and there's different aspects of the SCA have different levels of authenticity. There's LARPing. So you can go out there and have plenty of medieval-ish recreation, but when you try and like key in on authenticity and say, okay, well, if I were to take this snapshot and move it 500 years ago, would I stand out? Would someone like, if I were to like pop onto the streets of London in 1410, would like I get funny stares, or would I just blend into the background? That's a really interesting exercise, and I enjoy all the research that goes into doing that.
Yeah. Well, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe in your preferred podcatcher app and rate and review Media-eval on Apple Podcasts. I will read new 5-star reviews in future episodes. Please also follow the podcast on Twitter at Media-eval-pod and join the Facebook group. And you can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Sarah Ifdecker. And finally, if you have any questions or suggestions, I would love to hear from you via email at media.evalpod@gmail.com. So, Ari, thank you again for joining me.
All right. Talk to you soon. I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun here. This was a great conversation.
Definitely. And thank you all for listening to Media-eval. Bye.
Matthew Broderick, Michelle Pfeiffer, Rutger Hauer, Ladyhawke.